Drogon hovered above the silent field where Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen lay motionless in the dew-kissed grass. The night sky was moonless, as if the heavens themselves withheld their light, mourning the fall of the Dragon Queen. Her silver hair fanned out behind her, matted with blood, and Drogon's massive body cast a long shadow across her still form. For the first time in his brief but fiery life, Drogon felt adrift, bereft of the surety that had guided him in battle and flight. She had been his mother, not in any soft sense, but in the primal bond that existed between a dragon and the mortal who had first fed it, first commanded it, first named it. He roared, the sound ripping through the sky like thunder, echoing off the distant mountains, reverberating across the plains where once stood the armies she had led. No response came from the woman who had been the axis of his world. Daenerys lay unmoving, the ashes of her conquest strewn around her. Jon Snow had turned away, guilt carved on his face. He had loved her in his own somber way, yet had chosen duty over love. He had stabbed the woman he believed too dangerous for the realm she yearned to rule. Bran Stark sat at a distance, expression shuddered in that unknowable, faraway place from which he glimpsed the twisting currents of past, present, and future. Tyrion Lannister watched from a safe vantage, his eyes wide with sorrow, relief, and perhaps some measure of hope for the future. The Unsullied stood uncertain, Missandei Aegon, Grey Worm's heart a black hole of fury that could not find its mark. The world slowed around that single moment when Drogon's roar tore into the night air. The Watchers flinched, half expecting the beast to bathe them all in flames. But Drogon stooped and gathered Daenerys in his claws, gently as if she weighed nothing more than a child. The tension in the air was heavy enough to drown in. His wings beat once, twice, stirring fierce winds that made men stumble and raise their arms to shield their faces from dust and debris. There, in that moment, the Watchers believed the dragon would flee, carrying her body away to some unknown land, perhaps to the far east or the Black Mountains whence dragons had once roamed. They thought that this was the last they would see of Drogon, the last living child of fire, the last scion of a once great dynasty. Yet as Drogon's wings flattened and he began to rise, something changed. He spun in a wide arc, scanning the horizon as though searching for a place to land. With a sudden, terrible clarity, he realized Daenerys' future had been cut short in Westeros, the land she had tried so hard to claim as her birthright. Raging, inconsolable, Drogon's instincts warred within him. On the one hand, there was the ancient call of old Valyria that ran in his blood, urging him to leave these cold lands far behind. On the other, there was a primal, violent desire to remain. His mother had sworn to take the Iron Throne, to bend this land to her rule. Even in death, her cause might yet live. Tyrion dared to inch forward, his voice trembling in the night. Drogon. She's gone. He had no illusions the creature understood his words precisely, but perhaps it understood the tone of sorrow. Perhaps it sensed the defeat in the dwarf's voice, laced with regret. There's nothing more we can do. The dragon's huge, dark eyes fixed on him, and otherworldly intelligence flickering in the depths. Drogon's scaled chest expanded as he inhaled the cold night air, and for an instant Tyrion thought the beast might incinerate him where he stood. But something about the small man's posture, humble, broken, stayed Drogon's wrath. He growled low in his throat, a sound that vibrated through the air and set hearts hammering. Jon Snow clenched his fists, caught between heartbreak and duty. He could not bring himself to speak. He only watched, waiting for the final act of vengeance that he believed must come. Yet Drogon did not burn him. The dragon lifted off the ground instead, the beating of his wings stirring a maelstrom of leaves and ash. He rose into the sky, Daenerys' body cradled tenderly in his claws. Higher and higher he soared, a thunderous silhouette against the faint stars. Many thought that was the end of the Targaryen line. They believed Drogon would fly across the sea, perhaps to the ruins of Valyria, perhaps to some other realm of mystery and dragons. But to their shock, he circled back. Like a great black hawk descending on prey, Drogon plunged toward the ruins of King's Landing. Fires still smoldered from the siege. The charred rubble, buildings once teeming with life, lay in heaps of glowing embers. Wind-whipped flames danced in pockets across the city, and the stench of soot and burnt flesh hung on the air. Dropping low, Drogon settled on a tall, ruined tower that once belonged to the Red Keep. The stones were slick with blood and debris, but he balanced there in a swirl of ash, setting Daenerys' body gently upon the broken battlements. Not even the bravest of Grey Worm's men dared approach. From his vantage, Drogon gazed at the devastation she had wrought in her final days. She had broken the city, hammered it into submission with dragonfire. Now that same city sprawled below him like a wounded beast waiting for mercy or execution. Jon Snow, Tyrion, Grey Worm, and a few others stood far below, half hidden by the drifting smoke, staring up at the solitary dragon above them. Emotions warred in Jon's chest: grief, regret, relief, and a gnawing sense of responsibility. He had betrayed her, but perhaps betrayal was the only means of saving countless thousands. Tyrion watched too, mind churning. He wondered if the wheel Daenerys had promised to break would simply be reforged by someone else, or if Drogon's presence signaled a new age of fearsome unpredictability. Perhaps the real wheelbreaker had never been Daenerys herself but the dragons she commanded, or the monstrous force of destiny that emerged when dragons took to the sky. In the days and weeks that followed, Drogon did not depart Westeros. He remained perched amid the wreckage, a silent sentinel over Daenerys's body, which he refused to let anyone near. Every day at dawn, he roared, a cry that echoed throughout the blackened city, as though summoning the spirit of his mother from beyond the grave. The crows scattered. The small folk cowered. The remains of the Lannister soldiers and the unsullied garrisons kept their distance. Grey Worm, still numb from loss, found his purpose tethered to the presence of his queen, even if she was lost in death. He and the Unsullied stood at the perimeter of Drogon's chosen domain, refusing the approach of any stranger. They had no orders except the ones Daenerys had given in life, yet in her absence, they devolved into a hollow sort of guardianship. Guarding her memory, guarding her final resting place, uncertain if their next step was to sail to Noth or remain in the land she had wanted to rule. Diplomacy in the capital and beyond teetered on a knife's edge. Bran Stark, recently chosen as king of the Six Kingdoms, tried to find a way to bring peace to a realm still reeling from bloodshed. He convened a meeting of lords and ladies, calling upon his sister Sansa Stark, now queen in the north, to help keep lines of communication open. Tyrion, as Hand of the King, navigated the complexities of this new political landscape with an uneasy feeling in his gut. It was not the same cautious game of chess it used to be. They were dealing with a dragon of unknown temperament, unbound by any mortal queen, and they knew not how to handle him. Word began to spread that Drogon lingered in King's Landing. Small folk whispered that the dragon had lost his mind, that he would attack any moment. Others claimed the beast was waiting for Daenerys to be resurrected by some red priestess, longing for the miracle of second life. Rumors abounded that beyond the sea, other dragons might still exist, summoned by Drogon's roars. Yet these were the tales of commoners seeking meaning in times of desperation. More sober minds recognized a simpler truth. Drogon was a creature driven by loyalty and instinct. He would not abandon the mother he had lost, not yet. What none of them expected was the slow, subtle shift in Drogon's behavior. He no longer soared out to hunt in the farmland as frequently. He began roosting deeper within the ruins of the Red Keep, clearing a swathe of debris in what had once been the courtyard, piling rubble in a strange, methodical way. At times, the watchers on the walls saw him spitting small jets of fire, welding stones and charred timber together as if constructing a nest from the wreckage. None dared approach close enough to see what precisely he was doing. But from a distance, the city's survivors observed the transformation with a mix of awe and dread. When the day came that the Red Keep's remains trembled with a deep rumble, many feared the old fortress might collapse entirely into the sea. But the rumble was the sound of Drogon moving through the labyrinthine corridors that had half collapsed in the final battle. Once these halls had rung with the footsteps of Targaryen kings and queens, of Lannister usurpers and Baratheon lords. Now they were deserted and broken. Drogon carved a path, flames at his snout, stepping carefully over the rubble. Somewhere in the blackness of the old cellars he found what he was looking for, a skeleton. The skull of one of the old Targaryen dragons, half the size of Drogon's own head, lay in a corner gathering dust. At the sight of it, Drogon paused. A memory flickered across him, ancestral voices from across centuries, perhaps. He exhaled gently, almost a sigh, stirring up clouds of dust. Then, with slow deliberation, he took the massive relic in his claws and dragged it back to the courtyard, where Daenerys's body lay on a high dais of rubble. He set the skull near her feet, as though it were a token from his ancestors returned at last to stand vigil with her. It was weeks after Daenerys's death when the first significant attempt at contact occurred. A single rider approached the courtyard on horseback, flying the sigil of House Stark. Jon Snow, who had been banished to the Night's Watch but lingered in the capital to see affairs settled, volunteered for the attempt. He felt responsible not just for killing Daenerys but for the monstrous uncertainty that followed. Clad in leathers, unarmed except for a small dagger at his hip, he dismounted before the broken gates of the Red Keep. Overhead, Drogon glowered from the crumbled ramparts, his head pivoting to track Jon's every move. The rider's heart pounded. He recalled the heat of Drogon's flames in battle, how unstoppable the creature had been. Yet he swallowed his fear. Slowly, he approached on foot, each step measured and soft on the scorched ground. He spoke in a voice that trembled despite his best efforts. "I am Jon Snow, once you knew me. You know who I am." He felt foolish, talking to a dragon as if addressing a man. Yet the words flowed, compelled by the memory of Daenerys. "I grieve for her too. If there's anything I can do," Drogon roared before he could finish, and the force of it nearly knocked Jon to his knees. The dragon's eyes glowed with the reflections of distant flames. But he did not attack. He regarded Jon with a strange, seething intensity. Then, with a flick of his tail, Drogon leaped down from the battlement, landing heavily on the courtyard floor. The impact shook the ground, raising a swirl of ash. Face to face, Jon stood dwarfed by the black-scaled beast. The leftover scent of smoke and char stung his nostrils. Jon dared move a fraction closer, glancing toward Daenerys's body, which had been wrapped carefully by Drogon in pieces of sailcloth and old tapestry. He felt tears rise unbidden. He had not wept openly in front of the others, but now, seeing her lying there, her once bright eyes forever closed, he was struck again by the enormity of what he had done. His lips parted, but no words formed. Then Drogon did something unexpected. He lowered his head, his snout inches from Jon's chest. The heat radiating from the dragon's nostrils was scorching. Jon wondered if this would be the moment he was incinerated. But instead, Drogon inhaled as though catching Jon's scent, revisiting the memories of times Daenerys had been near him. Jon could almost see flickers of recognition in the creature's burning gaze. In a trembling voice, Jon said she wanted to break the chains. She wanted this land to be free. Drogon let out a low rumble, snaking his neck closer to Daenerys's body. Jon stepped aside, mindful not to appear threatening. The dragon's chest vibrated with a quiet, mournful growl, a sound so full of longing that Jon felt his throat tighten. In that moment, it became clear that Drogon's presence was not just about anger or retribution. It was about grief, about an echo of her unfinished dream. Drogon remained as if expecting Daenerys to rise again and claim what she had fought for. Jon Snow returned to the king's council with news that Drogon had not attacked him, which was both relieving and bewildering. Tyrion, his brow etched with worry, inquired if there was any sign the dragon might leave. Jon shook his head. He settled there as if it's his new lair. He has her body and the bones of other dragons. Something's changing in him. I can't explain it, but he doesn't feel wild anymore. He feels purposeful. Bran considered this with the quiet, eerie calm that had become his hallmark. He offered no immediate solution, only a cryptic remark: the dragons were never meant to fade from this land. Perhaps Drogon knows that. The lords and ladies murmured among themselves. Some clamored for the beast to be killed lest he become a new threat. Others argued that there was no way to kill such a creature without risking another burning of the city. Tyrion's mind whirled. He had once envied Daenerys for her dragons, those unstoppable instruments of war. But now a single living dragon occupied the capital, and the realm teetered on the brink of further chaos. Amid the confusion, an unexpected visitor arrived. A red priestess from Volantis, drawn by rumors of a grieving dragon, made her way to the crumbled gates. She was slender, robed in scarlet, her eyes shining with fervent belief. She called herself Hariella, claiming to have once walked the halls of the Temple of the Lord of Light, where many had hailed Daenerys as a chosen deliverer. Now, with Daenerys dead, Hariella insisted her spirit might yet fulfill a greater destiny. Her arrival sparked immediate debate. Some recalled Melisandre's misguided prophecies. Others felt a flicker of hope, wondering if there was a chance, however remote, that Daenerys Targaryen could be brought back. But the smell of burning flesh in King's Landing still lingered, a reminder that Daenerys's reign had ended in blood and fire. Could a resurrection, if even possible, herald a lasting peace or another wave of devastation? In the hush of twilight, Hariella stood outside the courtyard gates, chanting in a low voice. Drogon stared down at her, unblinking. She raised her arms, palms open. The silent tension stretched for a long, breathless moment. Then Drogon roared, unleashing a stream of flame that enveloped the gate. Hariella leaped back just in time, her robe singed. She did not attempt it again. Whatever the dragon guarded, it was not something he was willing to let go. If there was some mystic path to bring Daenerys back, Drogon showed no sign of allowing it. Hariella withdrew, shaken. Winter advanced, pressing down on the realm with relentless cold. Snow flurries dusted the scorched stones of King's Landing, mingling with ash. There was a haunting beauty to the sight, blackened spires cloaked in white, drifting embers snuffed out by snowflakes. Nonetheless, life carried on, and the small folk began to repair their homes, salvage what they could from the ruin. The presence of the dragon gave them reason to fear, but as the days turned to weeks, no further devastation befell them. Sometimes Drogon flew overhead, circling once or twice before returning to his nest. Many learned to live with his shadow crossing their fields. During one such day, a group of children crept near the Red Keep's outer walls, curious. They had heard stories that the dragon had built a nest of glowing embers. One child swore they had heard an egg had been laid, though who would lay it if Daenerys had been the mother, none could say. Rumors of a new generation of dragons took root in the city. The kids got close enough to see the courtyard from a gap in the masonry. Sure enough, glistening in the half-burnt rubble, they spotted strange, oval shapes. It might have been melted stone for all they knew, but it set their imaginations ablaze. One squeaked in alarm when a massive tail flicked into view. They scattered like mice. Yet the story they told spread among the populace. Could Drogon be forging some new future? Could dragons multiply again in Westeros? Many scoffed at the notion, where would a single male dragon produce eggs? But older legends spoke of dragon gender sometimes shifting or being fluid. Maesters remained skeptical. Nonetheless, the rumor refused to die. And as the weeks slid into months, the watchers stationed in hidden vantage points began to suspect it might be true. They observed how Drogon guarded certain lumps of heated rubble with a fierceness that went beyond mere territory. The realm's response was predictable. Some demanded these rumored eggs be destroyed, lest a plague of dragons be unleashed. Others, from a certain romantic vantage, saw it as a chance to resurrect House Targaryen's legacy, perhaps with a new sense of justice, a new sense of caution. Tyrion, for one, recognized the power such beasts would represent. He recalled how Cersei had quailed at the mere notion of an adult dragon laying waste to her armies. What if an entire flight of dragons soared again over Westeros? Yet where would their loyalties lie, with no living Targaryen to claim them? In the secrecy of the council, Bran the Broken conferred with his advisors. Even the newly crowned Aegon Targaryen, formerly known as Jon Snow, was sometimes invited to partake, though he insisted he no longer had any claim or desire for the throne. If Drogon truly has produced eggs, Bran said in his calm monotone, we must find a way to coexist. Killing him or the eggs could mean open war with a living dragon that might reduce what remains of the city to ash. Sansa, visiting from the north, questioned whether the realm could even survive more dragons. After what we saw, she said, eyes flicking to Jon, I wonder if it's wise to let these creatures remain. The Targaryens always boasted that dragons forged the Seven Kingdoms. But they also nearly tore them apart. Tyrion gazed at the table's scarred surface. So much had changed since the days when he served as hand to Daenerys. He had believed in her vision, then watched it crumble in the heat of vengeance and madness. We might have to negotiate, he said at last. But how do we negotiate with a dragon who's lost his queen? The answer came unexpectedly. Grey Worm, stoic as ever, stepped forward in the council, still wearing the sigil of the Targaryen dragon on his chest plate. He had been silent for much of these discussions, living in a haze of grief. Now his voice was quiet but resolute. He was her child, he said. He may still follow her will. If we act as she would have wanted, maybe we can guide him to a peace that Daenerys could never find in life. The others listened, uncertain. But Grey Worm's point stood. Daenerys might have wanted to rule with justice, at least in the earlier days of her campaign. Before fury and betrayal twisted her heart. Perhaps Drogon could be guided by the memory of the mother he lost. Slowly, a plan coalesced. They would attempt a gesture of respect. A funeral for the Dragon Queen. Let the realm see that the rulers who followed recognized her impact, for both good and ill. Let Drogon see that they honored her life. Perhaps if her remains were laid to rest with dignity, his watch would end and he would be more inclined to relocate, or at least to coexist without constant threat. While the notion of incurring Drogon's wrath frightened everyone, they knew something had to be done. They sent messages to all corners of Westeros, summoning the lords and ladies who could afford the journey. Not a coronation, not a wedding, but a solemn funeral rite to mark the passing of one who had, for a time, called herself Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. When the chosen day arrived, the remnants of the city's population gathered in the broad square fronting the Red Keep. Snowdrifts shimmered on the blackened marble. A dais of scorched wood and stone had been built in the center, large enough to hold a pyre. Soldiers in what remained of Targaryen livery escorted Daenerys's body, wrapped in white cloth embroidered with dragons, through the hush. Many watched with a mixture of apprehension and awe. Here was the woman who had freed slaves across the sea, who had marched armies into the north to fight the dead, who had then burned King's Landing in a monstrous fury. She was a figure of contradictions, savior and tyrant, liberator and conqueror. Drogon descended from the ruined keep, alighting by the dais. His presence made the crowd shrink back in terror, but no flame came. Instead, he lowered his head, exhaling a slow gust that stirred the cloth draping Daenerys's form. A hush fell, broken only by the wind. Grey Worm stepped forward, face grim. He placed a single silver coin, marking the cost of freedom once paid by Daenerys in Essos, on her chest. Jon Snow, face lined with guilt, placed a single white rose, found blooming in the frost. Tyrion hesitated, then placed a small lion sigil representing House Lannister as if to mark the complicated alliance they once had. Then the pyre was lit by torchlight, no dragon fire necessary. Flames licked up around Daenerys's body, cracking the wood, swirling with smoke that smelled of spices and old cloth. As the blaze rose, Drogon let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the city. Many covered their ears. He spread his wings, casting a vast shadow. Sparks danced and soared upward, mingling with falling snow. For a moment, the flames painted flickering visions across the sky, visions of a woman astride a dragon, of armies crossing the narrow sea, of chains broken. Then the vision dissolved in the swirling embers. Daenerys Targaryen, mother of dragons, was gone. The funeral might have ended there if not for what Drogon did next. As the final embers faded, he lifted his head and roared again. This time, the roar felt less like grief and more like a challenge. Then, without warning, he moved toward the nest he had built in the courtyard. The watchers followed at a respectful distance. There, partially hidden by stone and scorched timbers, lay 3 unmistakable eggs, each roughly the size of a large dog. Their shells were obsidian black, flecked with swirls of crimson and gold. A hush rippled through the crowd. The rumors were true. Jon stared, uncertain. How was this possible? Even from a meager knowledge of dragon lore, he knew that dragons sometimes changed sex if the need arose for reproduction, or that certain conditions might spur them to lay dormant eggs that had already formed. Or perhaps it was the last vestige of Targaryen magic. Whatever the cause, 3 new dragons might soon grace the skies. The realm held its breath, torn between wonder and fear. Drogon placed his massive claw gently around the eggs, as though bestowing them upon the watchers or guarding them from harm. Those present felt the raw power in the air. It was as if the ghost of Valyria had returned, conjuring an echo of the old empire of dragon lords. Then, unexpectedly, Drogon shifted his head to fix Jon Snow with a penetrating stare. The tension soared. Why Jon? Because he had Targaryen blood? Because he had loved Daenerys, or killed her, or both? For an endless moment, Jon feared an attack. But Drogon, with a deep, rumbling exhalation, nosed the eggs forward, closer to him, as if presenting them. A collective gasp spread through the onlookers. Jon's blood froze, uncertain what gesture he was meant to make. Slowly, he approached and laid a trembling hand on one of the warm shells. The surface pulsed with a strange vitality. Immediately, Drogon roared, but it was not a roar of fury. It was a summons. Jon's heart pounded, realizing that, for reasons beyond mortal understanding, Drogon saw in him the last remnant of Daenerys's blood and will. By acknowledging Jon, Drogon was setting a new path in motion. Soon the question of a new dragon empire on Westeros' soil loomed large. After the funeral, ravens flew to every corner of the 6 kingdoms. The north remained independent under Sansa. The existence of these 3 eggs and the possibility of them hatching lit a fire of panic and ambition across the land. Some houses immediately pledged support, hoping to curry favor. Others prepared defenses, not trusting a realm overshadowed by dragons. Those old enough to recall Aerys II's madness or the wars of conquest had no wish to bend the knee again to a Targaryen claim. But as winter deepened and King's Landing struggled to recover from the war's destruction, a perplexing calm settled around the dragon's nest. Drogon was watchful, letting few approach unless Jon Snow or Grey Worm accompanied them. The Unsullied, though depleted, remained steadfast in their watch. Freedmen from Essos, newly arrived, paid homage to the memory of Daenerys. The city's small folk rebuilt in the shadow of the Red Keep, and soon it was said that King's Landing was no longer just a seat of mortal kings, but a place where a living god of fire and scales held court. The lords of Westeros grumbled. Were they to be subject again to a Targaryen with a dragon? This question buzzed in every hall from the Stormlands to the Reach. Yet who would stand against Drogon if he chose to force an empire upon them? The memory of his devastation was fresh enough to quell outright rebellion. Yet neither Bran nor Sansa nor any of the newly stabilized lords had any appetite for war. And what of Jon, or Aegon Targaryen as some insisted on calling him? He claimed no interest in seizing power. But with Drogon seemingly bound to him, how long would that remain true? Time wore on. Snow piled against broken walls. People adapted. And then, on a bleak midwinter dawn, the first of the eggs cracked. Jon, summoned by an urgent messenger, arrived at the nest to find Drogon coiled protectively around the egg. Steam rose from the shell, spiderweb fissures traced across its surface. The sky was tinted red by the rising sun, and the air sparkled with frost. Grey Worm, Tyrion, and a small contingent of watchers stood at a respectful distance. They witnessed the birth of a new dragonling, black as midnight, with glimmers of scarlet along its spine. It emerged squealing, its voice a high, piercing cry that echoed off the stone. Drogon lowered his massive head as if to welcome his offspring into the world. The hatchling, trembling and wet, tried to stand on spindly legs. It was a sight no living person in Westeros had seen in over a century, the birth of a new dragon from a fresh-laid egg. Awe spread among the watchers. Some knelt. Others wept for fear or wonder. Jon felt his breath catch. This was not just a symbol. This was the dawn of a new era. If Drogon could produce one egg, then 3, perhaps more, in time, dragons might again roam these skies in numbers that could reshape the destiny of the continent. Word spread like wildfire, and people from all corners began trickling into King's Landing. Some came to pay tribute, others merely out of fascination or fear. The city that had been half abandoned began to fill again with curious souls, merchants, opportunists, scholars, and spies from every major house. In taverns, talk turned to whether House Targaryen was about to be reborn in power. Some believed Jon Snow would take the newly hatched dragon under his wing, literally and metaphorically, and proclaim himself the rightful king. Others whispered that if Daenerys could not rule peacefully, no Targaryen ever would. In every corner, tension bristled with possibility. To the council's collective surprise, Drogon allowed Jon to approach the newborn hatchling. The little creature hissed and snapped, but when Jon placed a cautious hand on its scaled back, it settled, blinking at him with eyes like molten gold. That moment seared itself into the memories of all present. Tyrion thought, with a pang of irony, that he was watching the second Targaryen, mother of dragons, in his lifetime. Yet Jon's face betrayed only awe, trepidation, and perhaps an echo of Daenerys' dream. And so it came to pass that King's Landing became a seat not just of mortal politics but of something older and more elemental. Drogon had built a nest in the heart of the Red Keep, forging it from fire and rubble, and now guarded not just his deceased mother's memory but a brood of new life. The second and third eggs hatched within the span of a month, yielding 2 more hatchlings, one pale gray streaked with black lines, the other glimmering with copper edges. Each had a distinct temperament. The black one was the largest, bold and swift in biting at the hands that fed it. The pale one was skittish, prone to dart behind Drogon's tail for shelter. The copper-flanked hatchling, smaller than the others, displayed a cunning curiosity, sniffing at everything in sight. Collectively, they were the living legacy of Daenerys Stormborn, the potential founders of a new dragon empire on Westeros. Now the question turned from how to rid the realm of dragons to how to prepare for their growth. Even in their infancy, the hatchlings could unleash small jets of flame. The potential for catastrophe was enormous, but so too was the possibility of harnessing them for the betterment of the realm. Could they be trained to protect the people? Or would they be used as tools of tyranny? The realm's unity hinged on the answer. Jon Snow wrestled with his conscience. He had killed Daenerys to save countless lives, yet now he found himself in a position that mirrored her original advantage, a bond with dragons. People began addressing him with titles he loathed, Your Grace, Dragon Lord, even the Dragon King. He insisted he would claim no crown, but the force of events drew him inexorably forward. He spent long hours in the courtyard, learning the mannerisms of the hatchlings, feeding them scraps of goat or sheep. Drogon hovered protectively but gradually allowed him closer. With each passing day, Jon's bond with the hatchlings grew, reminiscent of how Daenerys had once been with her own brood. Word reached the far corners of the continent. The Targaryen line lived in him and the dragons answered his call. Inevitably, rivalries resurfaced. Certain great houses feared a Targaryen restoration under Jon Snow or some puppet council. They worried that their ancestral rights or newly won freedoms would be trampled under the claws of dragons. Secret plots brewed. Among them, the newly emboldened House Ironwood in Dorne, outraged by the destruction wrought by Dany's war, entertained clandestine alliances to keep these new dragons in check. House Greyjoy watched from the Iron Islands, uncertain whether they might gain advantage by siding with or against the dragons. In the Vale, the suspicious Lord Royce conferred with his bannermen, remembering how once the area had only been safe because dragons could not land easily on their precipitous heights. Would that hold true if dragons multiplied? Simultaneously, across the narrow sea, word of Daenerys's death and Drogon's brood stirred old loyalties. Freedmen who had once followed the breaker of chains felt a renewed sense of purpose. Perhaps the mother of dragons' spirit lived on in her children. Some dreamed of traveling to Westeros, pledging fealty to Drogon and the new hatchlings. A scattered diaspora of Targaryen loyalists whispered that the true capital of a dragon empire might yet be forged. In the midst of all this tension, Bran the Broken summoned a grand council to address the dragon question. Every lord or lady of note was invited, even the archmasters from the Citadel, though they arrived with an air of deep skepticism. The meeting was held in a partially restored hall within King's Landing, restored enough to accommodate the large gathering, though the roof still bore scorch marks. The opening of the council was marked by an uneasy hush as Tyrion, serving as the realm's spokesman, addressed the crowd. "We all know why we're here," he began, voice echoing in the half-rebuilt chamber. "We stand on the cusp of an age not seen since Aegon the Conqueror first landed at the mouth of the Blackwater. Dragons have returned, and with them, the power to remake the realm for good or ill." He cast a significant glance toward Jon, who stood near the dais, uncomfortable in his black cloak and stark leathers. The crowd shifted, murmuring. Lord Glover of the North spoke first, demanding assurances that the North would remain free from dragon dominion. Lord Tarly of Hornhill asked if these new dragons would be forced to fight in any conflict arising from disputed succession. A young Lannister cousin from Casterly Rock expressed fear that the realm would be dominated by one man's whim. Through it all, Jon's expression remained pained. "I have no desire to conquer," Jon said at last, voice steady despite the tension. "I've seen too much blood spilled. But these dragons exist, no one can undo that. If I do not learn to guide them, if we do not learn to coexist with them, they will take what they need anyway. We face a choice, kill them or live alongside them in some new order." A hush. Many lords weighed the enormity of the decision. Grey Worm stood silent beside the dais, the Unsullied behind him. Could they even kill Drogon if they tried? Probably not without incurring massive destruction. And even if they did, 3 young dragons remained, perhaps soon to grow to monstrous size. One of the archmasters stepped forward, a tall man with a face like dried parchment. "We have studied dragons for centuries. They are not easily tamed, nor are they mindless beasts. Their intelligence is formidable. They bond to riders, yet remain creatures of fire and fury. We counsel caution. If any union is to be formed between men and dragons, it should be forged with vigilance and checks upon power." A ripple of agreement moved through the hall. The memory of King's Landing in flames weighed heavily on all. Tyrion nodded. "Hence, we propose a new system. Dragons do not belong to any single monarch. Instead, we create an order, a brotherhood, if you will, sworn to learn from them, to raise them with care and in line with the realm's laws. Jon Snow has a special bond that may guide them, but he shall not hold ultimate sovereignty. The authority is shared with the king in the 6 kingdoms and the queen in the north. If the people choose it, we can shape the future together." The proposal was radical. Many bristled at the notion of giving dragons a formal place in the governance of Westeros. Yet what else to do? They could not simply ignore the presence of these creatures. The debate raged on. Some demanded the hatchlings be destroyed before they grew. Others argued that dragons, once unleashed, could not be undone and the realm must adapt. Hours passed, arguments turning to shouts, tempers fraying. Jon found himself at the center of it, though all he wanted was peace. At last, Bran spoke, his voice softer than the rest but freighted with uncanny wisdom. "I have seen many possibilities," he said. "In some, dragons burn all that remains of the city. In others, they become the protectors of a flourishing kingdom. The difference lies not in the dragons themselves, but in us. Will we allow fear and ambition to twist us as it twisted Daenerys? Or will we learn from our mistakes?" That quiet pronouncement settled the hall. They had all witnessed the horrors of unbridled power. Even Tyrion, once Daenerys' advisor, knew how lofty ideals could turn to devastation. Finally, step by step, a fragile consensus emerged. They would give the newborn dragons a chance. Under strict oversight from the realm's collective leadership, Jon Snow would act as their caretaker, training them as best he could under Drogon's watchful eye. The realm would form a council dedicated to dragon affairs, ensuring no single house could claim them as war beasts for personal advantage. Many details remained to be hammered out, but it was a start. Outside, in the courtyard, Drogon remained perched on the old battlements, gazing toward the assembly hall as if sensing the course of events. Snow fell in drifting sheets. The newborn dragons huddled in the nest, squawking occasionally. Jon approached them after the council adjourned for the night, exhaustion weighing on him like a leaden cloak. The black hatchling hissed, eyes gleaming, but allowed him to stroke its neck. Heat radiated from its scales. "What now?" Jon muttered under his breath. He thought of Daenerys, how she had once been a young woman cradling 3 impossible eggs. Perhaps in her heart she had desired a world free of tyranny. But the taste of power had led her astray. Could these hatchlings, raised in a different environment, truly bring a better future? Weeks turned to months, and winter gradually began its slow retreat. The days grew a fraction longer, the sun a bit warmer. Jon, with assistance from the realm's new Dragon Council, undertook the delicate work of feeding and training the young dragons. Their growth was rapid, as if spurred by deep ancestral magic. Within half a year, they had doubled in size, able to sustain short flights on their leathery wings. Drogon guided them with stern roars, occasionally snapping at them if they strayed too close to the city's populous areas. Tyrion oversaw the logistics. Sheep flocks were corralled in designated feeding grounds outside the city, compensating farmers to ensure a steady supply of livestock. The dragons were taught to hunt in controlled ways, so they wouldn't ravage the countryside. Grey Worm and the Unsullied patrolled the perimeter, preventing foolish or opportunistic men from trying to slip in and harm the creatures. Inevitably, the first real conflict emerged when a small band of zealots, calling themselves the Faithful Warriors of the Seven, tried to infiltrate the courtyard at night, planning to kill the dragon spawn in their nest. They believed the dragons were abominations that had brought destruction upon the city. Drogon caught their scent immediately, unleashing a burst of flame that consumed them before they could harm a single scale. The next morning, the blackened corpses were found near the shattered gate. Tension flared in the city, as some saw them as martyrs. Jon, stricken by the violence, realized any attempt to subdue the dragons would result in bloodshed. Trust had to be built, not forced. In the grand tapestry of Westeros, people continued to scheme. Lords from the Reach tried to negotiate special privileges for their exports in exchange for supporting the Dragon Council. Dorne remained wary, withholding a full endorsement. The Iron Islands toyed with the notion of sending raiders to test the coasts near King's Landing, but the fear of dragonfire stayed their hand for now. The realm balanced on a razor's edge, uncertain whether to embrace or fear this new reality. Across the sea, in Volantis, red priests whispered of the prophecy of the prince that was promised. Some said it was Jon who had Targaryen blood and now guided dragons. Others claimed the mantle still belonged to Daenerys, that she would be reborn somehow to claim her rightful place. Hariella the Red Priestess lingered in the city, occasionally preaching that the light of Lawlor had not yet finished its work. She claimed the dragons represented a cleansing fire destined to sweep away the old order. In hushed corners, some whispered that she conspired to resurrect the mother if she could find Daenerys's ashes. But the pyre had left naught but cinders scattered in the wind, and Drogon's watchful presence made any tampering unthinkable. In time, the young dragons grew large enough to perch on the ramparts without toppling them. The black one, nicknamed Obsidian by some of the city folk, was clearly the alpha among the brood, bold, territorial, quick to show dominance. The pale one, called Ghostwing for the eerie shimmer of its scales, was cautious and swift. The copper-flanked one earned the name Emberheart, for it displayed unusual warmth toward those it deemed friendly, sometimes letting Jon or Grey Worm approach without bristling. Observers marveled at their differences, recognizing that each might play a unique role in shaping the future. The day came when Obsidian took his first extended flight beyond the city walls, accompanied by Drogon. They soared high above the patchwork fields, their shadows gliding across farmland and forest. Villagers gazed up, terrified and awestruck. Tales of the dragon's flight spread within hours. Some saw it as a herald of doom, others as a sign of renewal. Jon Snow, who had been working closely with the council, realized they needed a demonstration of peaceful intent. Through painstaking negotiation, they organized a choreographed flight. Jon and Drogon, along with the young dragons, would fly in formation around the city, then circle outward to the farmland. The watchers in the city would see them pass overhead without unleashing flame or destruction, proving that the dragons could be guided. It was a gamble. Dragons were still wild creatures, especially the hatchlings. But if it succeeded, it might quell the worst fears and unify the realm behind the new arrangement. On the appointed morning, the sky was a radiant blue. The sunlight gleamed on Drogon's black scales like dark armor. Obsidian, Ghostwing, and Emberheart flapped around him, smaller but quickly gaining confidence. A hush fell upon King's Landing as they took flight, passing low over the rooftops. People craned their necks, squinting against the glare. Tyrion, standing on a high balcony, felt a lump in his throat. This was a moment of history, perhaps for good, perhaps for ill. Drogon roared once, a commanding sound, and the 3 young dragons followed in a wide arc above the city walls. Jon watched from the ground, heart pounding. He'd been offered the chance to attempt riding one of the hatchlings, but he refused, fearing it was too soon. Let them fly free, guided only by Drogon's paternal instincts. All eyes were on them. The Watchers saw no jets of flame, no attack on the city. Instead, they watched for silhouettes crossing the sky, the largest in the lead, the others trailing like ducklings behind their mother. A roar of mingled relief and applause rose from the crowd. For a moment, King's Landing set aside its scars and heartbreak to marvel at the sight. The formation moved out over the farmland, sweeping past flocks of sheep, the Watchers below cowering but unscathed. Then Drogon led them back around in a graceful loop, returning to the Red Keep. When they alighted on the broken battlements, cheers erupted. A fragile hope swelled in the hearts of many. Perhaps this time, the realm could live alongside dragons without burning. Perhaps the mistakes of the past need not be repeated. The lords and ladies in the castle breathed easier, except those who privately plotted how they might eventually exploit or sabotage this new arrangement. Yet for all the optimism, a single flight would not erase the tension from a war-torn continent. Over the next months, small rebellions and conspiracies flared in distant regions, where old feuds refused to die. Jon and the council sent envoys to quell rumors and negotiate truces. At times, Drogon or one of the younger dragons made appearances in the skies above rebellious strongholds, an unmistakable warning that open insurrection would be crushed. Often, that alone was enough to force a negotiation. But Jon insisted that the dragons not unleash their flames except in dire need. The memory of King's Landing's ruins weighed heavily on him, a reminder that once the threshold of violence was crossed, it was all too easy to plunge into chaos. Slowly, a new pattern emerged, a realm where the presence of dragons served as both a deterrent and a symbol of possible renewal. The people came to speak of a dragon empire, though it was less an empire than a fragile confederation. Bran's authority as king of the 6 kingdoms remained. Sansa held the north, but beneath that structure lay the unspoken truth that dragons now had a place of honor. Nobles might bow to the monarch, but they also recognized the necessity of pleasing the Dragon Council, to which Tyrion, Grey Worm, certain archmasters, and even representatives from Dorne and the Iron Islands belonged. This new body regulated the feeding, care, and potential use of the dragons. While far from perfect, it was a step toward checks and balances. Over the seasons, the young dragons grew, though none reached Drogon's size yet. Their color patterns deepened. Obsidian scales turned darker than midnight, flecked with subtle sparks of red. Ghostwing developed a silver sheen along its wingtips, while Emberheart's copper hue gleamed in the sunlight like polished metal. Each displayed distinct personalities with moments of startling intelligence. Dragonkeepers, volunteers from across the realm who had some aptness with animals, were trained under Jon's watchful eye. They learned not just to feed and contain the dragons, but to respect their fierce independence. Bit by bit, the notion of a new era of dragons took hold in Westeros. And Drogon himself? He watched over all with a regal distance. Sometimes he disappeared for days at a time, returning with the scent of distant shores clinging to his scales as though patrolling the entire continent. No one dared follow. Rumor said he had traveled beyond the wall or over the narrow sea as if searching for something. Each time he returned, he circled the Red Keep, roared once, and settled by Daenerys's old nesting place where her ashes had been scattered. Jon, watching from a distance, felt a pang of empathy. Drogon carried the weight of her memory in every wing beat. Perhaps that was the true impetus behind all of this, the vow to preserve what remained of her dream, but in a form less cruel than the final days of her life. Seasons turned once more. The realm stabilized, though pockets of discontent remained. New roads were built, shipping resumed, and fields once scorched by dragonfire were replanted. The presence of dragons overhead became almost routine to the people of King's Landing, like living under the watchful eyes of strange, silent guardians. Children no longer screamed in terror at the sight, but giggled in awe, pointing tiny fingers at the sky. One crisp morning, an odd hush settled over the Red Keep. Jon Snow rose from his bed with a sense of foreboding he couldn't explain. Moving through the courtyard, he noticed Drogon perched on a high parapet, staring at the horizon with an intensity that made Jon's hair stand on end. Following the dragon's gaze, he saw only the pale blue sky. Then a faint shape flickered on the edge of sight. Another dragon? The watchers in the courtyard muttered in confusion. But as it grew closer, the silhouette resolved into a single shape, a rider astride some winged creature? A trick of the light? Moments later, their speculation ended as the shape vanished. Perhaps it had been an illusion, a cloud formation, or a bird that seemed larger in the distance. Drogon relaxed his posture, settling back into a watchful stance. Yet Jon's heart hammered in his chest. The notion that another dragon might be out there, drawn by Drogon's call, sparked equal measures of excitement and dread. The future was open, uncertain, shaped by forces beyond mortal comprehension. It was a testament to how deeply changed Westeros had become. The possibility of more dragons no longer seemed impossible. In the days that followed, no second dragon appeared, and talk of the sighting subsided into rumor. Life went on. And in that ordinary, extraordinary existence, the seeds of the New Age blossomed. Delegations arrived from across the sea, curious about the reborn dragons and potential trade alliances. The free cities, once dismissive of Westeros's chaos, realized something profound was happening here, an empire taking shape not through brutal conquest alone, but through the delicate balance of power shared between a council, a crippled king, a reluctant Targaryen heir, and the beasts of legend that soared above them all. A moment of calm prosperity settled over King's Landing and beyond, though no one believed it permanent. The past had taught them that peace was fleeting, especially when dragons were involved. Ambition simmered in the hearts of men, and old grudges never stayed buried for long. Yet for the first time in many years, the people dared to hope that this dragon empire might not be a nightmare, but a chance at rebirth, a chance to fulfill Daenerys Targaryen's earliest vision of a realm freed from tyranny, guided by justice. Whether that vision would endure or collapse under the weight of mortal failings was a question no one could answer. But for now, Drogon remained, a towering sentinel of black scales and molten eyes, father to a new generation of dragons and living proof that fire could be tempered by resolve. The snows receded further, revealing green fields and budding flowers. Children in the streets played at being dragon riders, chasing one another with makeshift wings. Poets composed verses of the ebony flight, praising Drogon's brood. In high halls, lords and ladies might debate the intricacies of the Dragon Council or the meaning of Jon Snow's Targaryen blood, but in the dusty corners of city squares, hope sparked like a fresh flame. The realm healed inch by inch from the scars of war. And yet, in the dark corners of taverns, whispers lingered. What if Drogon's brood grew too numerous? What if the cycle repeated and dragonfire once again devoured half the continent? There was no easy answer. Mortals are creatures of story as much as truth, and the story of dragons in Westeros had never been one of simple peace. But still, a hush of possibility hung in the air, as though the entire land stood on the cusp of forging a new legend. The Watchers, from distant lords to small folk in thatched huts, knew they were living in an age of wonder. In time, even the wounds of the past might fade enough for gratitude to creep in, gratitude that Drogon had not flown away with Daenerys's body, that he had stayed in Westeros to forge a new destiny. In the blazing arcs of his flight above the city, in the hiss of newborn hatchlings, in the cautious alliances formed between once bitter rivals, there one could sense the heartbeat of a renewed realm. Call it a dragon empire, call it a fragile confederation. It was alive, unpredictable, and fiercely beautiful as all creatures of fire and wing must be. Jon Snow often found himself on a high rampart at dusk, gazing westward where the sun sank into the sea. He would think of Daenerys, of the day he ended her life, of the dream she carried and the ashes that remained. Then he would hear the flapping of wings behind him. Turning, he might see Drogon landing on a nearby tower or Obsidian diving after a stray gull. Sometimes, when the clouds ignited in the pink and gold light of sunset, Jon felt that Daenerys might be watching from beyond, seeing how her last living child had become a king in his own right, forging a new empire by the sheer fact of his existence. Whether the realm thrived or fell, the dragons had returned. They were not mere beasts. They were living embodiments of a promise older than any crown, older than any war. They reminded mortals of the raw power and wonder that resided in the world. And so Westeros adapted, forging alliances, treaties, and councils to ensure that Dragonfire would serve creation rather than destruction. The future remained unwritten, but the land no longer lived in terror of the sky. Instead, as the months and years passed, it looked upward with guarded hope, awaiting the day when those majestic silhouettes soared overhead not as conquerors but as partners in a new destiny. That is how Drogon, child of Daenerys Stormborn, stayed in Westeros and became the founder of a new dragon empire, an empire not of crowns alone, but of shifting alliances, of trembling hope and cautious vigilance. In its uncertainty and its promise, it reflected the best and worst of mortals and dragons alike, ever balanced on the edge of a sword. For as long as men draw breath and dragons soar, that tension endures. And yet in the roar of a dragon at dawn, in the sparkle of scales against the rising sun, one can almost believe that the cycle of fire and blood might finally yield something better, a realm learning to rise from the ashes. Guided by the memory of one woman's dream, carried aloft on black wings into the wide, uncharted future. The snows receded further, uncovering the battered roads that wound their way through the outlying villages and farmland around King's Landing. Spring was at hand, delicate green shoots pressing up through the blackened earth once scorched by Dragonfire. The city itself still showed scars, half-demolished buildings, craters where once bustling squares had stood, and the ever-present skeletal remains of the Red Keep where Drogon and his brood had taken roost. Yet for all the ruin, there was life. Merchants haggled in open-air markets rebuilt from salvaged timber. Street urchins darted down alleyways carrying baskets of bread. Soldiers from multiple houses, often wearing mismatched armor and bearing the sigils of alliances newly forged, patrolled the thoroughfares. The realm had not forgotten its wounds, but it had learned, at least for now, to live with them. Drogon continued to preside over the city like a black-winged monarch, a silent presence on the highest battlements when he was not off on his solitary flights. His three offspring, Obsidian, Ghostwing, and Emberheart, were now halfway to a subadult size, their wingspans each approaching that of 2 wagons placed end to end. Sometimes, the smaller dragons bickered among themselves, snapping and growling when jostling for position in the nest. Other times they soared together over the city, wheeling in broad arcs like living shadows beneath the clouds. The Targaryen banner, once torn and burned, had been half-heartedly restored and draped near the entrance to the courtyard. Its scarlet dragon shimmered in the shifting light, a symbol that was not quite official but had become inseparable from the new identity taking shape. Few called King's Landing by its older names anymore. Some had begun to label it the City of Dragons or simply the Dragon's Nest. Jon Snow spent a good part of each day working with the young dragons, studying their temperaments, learning how to guide them with subtle gestures, tone of voice, and the intangible empathic link he seemed to share, perhaps through his Targaryen blood. He had no illusions of controlling them completely. Dragons were not dogs to be tamed, and it was best to meet them halfway, balancing respect with quiet authority. Over time, Obsidian warmed to him. The big black hatchling, largest of the three, made a game of hovering just out of reach when Jon offered food, then swooping down to snatch it at the last second. Ghostwing, the pale and swift one, remained more aloof, sometimes letting Jon approach but often fleeing to circle overhead as if torn between curiosity and caution. Emberheart was the friendliest, if one could use such a word for a draconic temperament. She sometimes allowed Jon or Grey Worm to run hands along her copper-scaled neck, letting out small hisses of pleasure that sounded more like a forge's crackle than the purr of a cat. Still, the dragons grew restless. They wanted to fly farther, explore wider territories, and Jon could sense an ever-present tension in them, as if they itched for a horizon beyond the city's walls. The Dragon Council, as it had come to be called, held its sessions in a rebuilt wing of the Red Keep. Many illusions had been stripped away in the transition to this new system of governance. No one pretended that the council was some paragon of democracy. Power still circulated among the great houses, with the monarchy of Bran the Broken in the Six Kingdoms, Sansa's independent north, and the question of Targaryen legitimacy swirling around Jon Snow. Yet the presence of dragons demanded caution and compromise, so the council operated as a forum where each house could send representatives to propose laws, raise complaints, or request the dragon's presence for reasons both legitimate and suspect. Tyrion Lannister, still serving as hand to Bran and as an unofficial mediator in these sessions, often joked that the council was more unruly than any game of Syvass he had ever played. But behind his wry half-smiles, concern lingered. If a serious conflict erupted, would the dragons be used as weapons again? Or would the realm shatter under the kind of tension? In one such session, Lord Ironwood of Dorne presented a formal petition. He was a tall, dark-haired man with a scar across one cheek earned during a skirmish with Targaryen forces in the last war. His voice was deep, and he delivered his plea with a mix of boldness and caution. Our breadbasket has not fully recovered from the disruptions in trade and the scorched fields left in the wake of the last conflict. We need stable routes for grain imports, and the roads through the Stormlands remain unsafe. Bandits roam at will, and our caravans are harassed. We ask that the council deploy the dragons under watchful guidance, of course, to patrol the roads. One roar from above would scatter these outlaws. A ripple of murmurs passed through the chamber. Jon Snow, seated near the dais in a simple wooden chair, exchanged a look with Grey Worm, who stood behind him. Grey Worm's dark eyes flicked over the assembled lords, searching for hints of hidden agendas. Tyrion cleared his throat. "An interesting request, my lord," he said, tapping his fingers on the table. "But we must exercise caution. We do not want the dragons perceived as a roving army that might incinerate any threat without trial or judgment. Besides," he added dryly, "the moment we use dragons to handle local banditry, we'll have a queue of lords demanding the same for their own petty disputes." Lord Ironwood inclined his head. "I understand the danger of overreach, but consider that bandits are not petty criminals. They terrorize the small folk, steal harvests, and disrupt the trade lines that feed half the realm. A single demonstration of draconic presence could frighten them off, no need for burning them alive unless they're foolish enough to attack." Jon listened quietly, feeling the weight of Your request. Dragons were not vigilantes to be summoned at every whim. Yet the plight of Dorne was real, and the realm's roads were indeed perilous in many places. He glanced at Bran, whose face remained as inscrutable as ever. The king in the Six Kingdoms stared at Lord Ironwood with his distant, all-seeing gaze. "We must think carefully," Bran said, voice as soft as the drift of wind through old trees. "The dragons do not exist for mortal convenience. Nor can we allow them to become idle. They are creatures of flight, built for freedom. A demonstration of their presence might indeed quell chaos if done judiciously. But the consequences, we cannot see them all." Tyrion exhaled. "So we propose a compromise. Let us dispatch a modest force of men to escort your caravans, men from both the crown and from your region. Let one young dragon, perhaps Emberheart, fly overhead as a deterrent. But strictly no open flame unless in self-defense. If that suits all parties, we can test whether the presence of a single dragon on patrol does more harm or good." The debate raged for another hour, but eventually an accord was reached. It was decided that the bright copper-hued Emberheart, being the least aggressive of the brood, would accompany a small patrol to the roads leading from the Stormlands into Dorne. Jon would direct the mission, though Tyrion insisted on sending a few seasoned knights to ensure discipline. Grey Worm volunteered a handful of Unsullied as well, stoic men who would not be intimidated by the dragon's presence or react rashly at the first sign of trouble. The arrangement felt precarious, but it was something, and Lord Ironwood left with a look of guarded satisfaction. The next morning, in the courtyard beneath a hazy sunrise, Jon prepared to set out with Emberheart and the patrol. The dragon, now about the size of 2 horses lined up nose to tail, lowered her coppery neck to accept a custom-fitted harness that the city's blacksmiths had fashioned. It took months of trial and error to craft something that would not chafe her scales or restrict her flight. Jon did not intend to ride her in close quarters. She was still too young and unpredictable for fully armored riders, but the harness allowed a single passenger to sit near her shoulders, anchored by straps. More importantly, it gave the patrol on the ground a means to attach supplies. She shifted irritably as the straps were tightened, letting out a hissing growl. Jon stroked the ridges above her eye, murmuring a few calming words. "Easy there. We'll keep this short. Just a little flight." A small crowd of onlookers had gathered, curious small folk, a few visiting lords, and the rest of the Dragon Council. Tyrion stood with arms folded, his expression unreadable. Grey Worm's stance was typically impassive, but Jon noted the slight furrow in the commander's brow as though he worried about releasing a single dragon into the wider realm. The 2 other young dragons watched from the high ramparts, heads cocked, occasionally sending shrill calls down to their sister. Above them, Drogon perched like a watchful gargoyle, his black eyes glinting in the dawn light. Jon felt Drogon's presence more keenly than ever, as if the older dragon were sending some wordless warning, "Do not fail her, or me." With the harness in place, Jon took hold of the straps and climbed onto Emberheart's back. The knights and Unsullied, mounted on horses, formed up behind him, ready to depart through the city gates. Jon felt the dragon shift beneath him, her muscles bunching as she tested the weight. Then, with a thunderous whoosh, Emberheart spread her wings. The watchers gasped, stepping back at the gust of wind and dust. She lifted off, perhaps 20 feet, wobbled uncertainly, then touched down again. A second attempt went more smoothly, and soon Jon was aloft, clinging to the harness, heart pounding at the surge of exhilaration. Below, the patrol set out at a gallop, trying to keep Emberheart in sight as she rose higher. The flight south was both awe-inspiring and nerve-wracking. Emberheart rode the rising thermals, sometimes dipping low enough that Jon could see farmers in the fields staring up, mouth agape, or children running toward their houses in delight and fear. Although the adrenaline coursed through his veins, Jon remained vigilant, scanning the ground for threats or signs of trouble. Over the hours, Emberheart grew accustomed to his weight, glancing back occasionally with a flicker of interest, as if to say, "Are you still there?" Twice she landed to rest, allowing the patrol to catch up, feed the horses, and regroup. The knights, wide-eyed at their proximity to the dragon, performed their duties admirably, though Jon could see the sweat beading on their brows whenever Emberheart hissed or spread her wings. They reached the disputed road by dusk, a winding route that led through forested hills and eventually down into Dornish territory. The patrol made camp, choosing a defensible clearing near a small stream. Emberheart settled at the edge of the trees, curling her tail around her legs, occasionally flicking it in annoyance when midges buzzed too close. She kept a wary distance from the horses, who snorted in alarm at her smell. Jon unhooked the harness, letting her move freely, then walked around to check her scales for any sign of chafing. Emberheart tolerated the inspection with mild impatience. Night fell, and the men huddled around a campfire. They spoke in hushed tones of the dragon, of King's Landing, of rumors that more eggs might appear in the future. One of the younger knights, a lad from the Reach with straw-colored hair, asked Jon if he thought the realm was truly better off with dragons again. Jon's reply was guarded. "Better off, I don't know. But they're here, and ignoring them won't make them vanish." The knight nodded thoughtfully, stirring the embers of the fire. Beyond the circle of light, Emberheart's eyes glowed like twin coals, watchful, inscrutable. At dawn, they proceeded along the road. Word of their coming must have traveled ahead, for the first few caravans they encountered stopped in wide-eyed astonishment, then rushed forward when they realized the dragon was not laying waste to everything in sight. One grizzled merchant insisted on presenting Jon with a small silver medallion in gratitude for the patrol's protection. He recounted how bandits had attacked him a fortnight ago, stealing half his wares. Now, with a dragon overhead, he doubted any such ambush would dare approach. Yet as the patrol continued, signs of violence became evident. The remains of a burnt wagon lay half-buried in a ditch, its wheels smashed. Farther on, they found a farmhouse with broken shutters, the family cowering inside, battered and hungry. They whispered of masked men who had raided them in the night, taking what little coin and food they had. Jon felt a familiar knot of anger in his gut. So soon after a great war, the realm's small folk deserved respite, but lawlessness lingered. That day, he vowed to corner these bandits if he could. The presence of Emberheart might be the best deterrent, but if it came to a fight, he was ready. Late afternoon saw the patrol winding through a narrow pass where rocky cliffs rose on either side. There, the bandits struck. A volley of arrows whistled down from above, forcing the patrol to scatter. Horses screamed, men shouted. Jon, riding Emberheart overhead, felt a rush of fear and adrenaline. The dragon, startled by the sudden attack, unleashed a roar. Her first instinct was to spit flame at the cliffs, but Jon reined her in, tugging the harness straps and shouting, "No." He remembered their orders, no open flame unless absolutely necessary. Still, the bandits' arrows rained down, one glancing off Emberheart's flank. She screeched, banking wildly. Jon clung on with all his strength. Below, the knights took cover, returning fire with crossbows. The Unsullied advanced with shields raised, forming a defensive perimeter around the startled horses. More arrows poured down from the rocky ledges. Jon spied the dark shapes of half a dozen ambushers. Some fled at the sight of the dragon overhead, but others stood their ground, presumably thinking their vantage would keep them safe. Jon maneuvered Emberheart in a wide arc. She growled, smoke seeping from her nostrils, desperate to let loose a gout of flame. Again, Jon urged restraint. Instead, he guided her lower, letting out a fierce shout that echoed off the stones. The intimidation worked. Several of the bandits threw down their bows and scrambled backward, losing their footing. One man slipped and fell, tumbling into the canyon below with a terrified cry. The others fled, scattering into the crevices in the rocks. The barrage of arrows tapered off, though a handful still clattered uselessly against the knights' shields. Sensing an opening, Jon circled Emberheart in for a landing near the largest group of bandits who remained, brandishing weapons. As soon as Emberheart's claws touched earth, she bared her teeth in a hissing snarl that reverberated through the pass. The bandits faltered, one or two dropping their swords. Jon leapt from the harness, sword in hand, as the Unsullied and knights converged. It was a brief, bloody skirmish. The bandits, overwhelmed by the dragon's presence, panicked. A few tried to fight, but they were no match for disciplined soldiers. When the dust settled, 2 of the bandits lay dead, 3 injured, and the rest bound. Emberheart prowled in a slow circle, wings half-furled, exhaling quick gusts of heated breath. She had not unleashed her flames, yet the smell of char hung in the air, emanating from her mouth. Jon walked among the fallen, ensuring no further threat remained. One of the captured bandits spat at his feet, cursing them for tying yourselves to monsters. Jon said nothing, merely looked at Emberheart's lethal grace and reflected on how quickly men forgot that these creatures could wipe out entire armies. The captive glared back, unrepentant. Yet when Emberheart hissed in his direction, he flinched and turned his face away. With the pass cleared, the patrol resumed their journey, escorting a merchant caravan that had been pinned down by the ambush. They reached a fortified crossroads by nightfall where House Ironwood's soldiers met them with cautious gratitude. Lord Ironwood himself was not present, but his castellan welcomed Jon and his men, offering them barracks in the outpost's small courtyard. The presence of Emberheart made the outpost's guards jittery, so Jon guided her to an open field on the outskirts where she roosted among tall grass. She eventually settled, letting out a rumbling sigh that shook the ground beneath her belly. The following days served to confirm the overall success of the mission. Caravans moved more freely once word spread that a dragon patrolled the roads. Bandit attacks dropped off. Meanwhile, Emberheart acclimated to flying with a harness and dealing with unfamiliar terrain. Jon visited local villages to gauge their reactions. To his surprise, many small folk welcomed the dragon's presence, though with a healthy dose of fear. At least a fearsome protector was preferable to marauders. Still, Jon sensed the precariousness of this arrangement. A single misunderstanding, an arrow shot by a panicked villager, or an overzealous knight giving the wrong command could result in a flash of flame and renewed terror. He felt the weight of that responsibility every time Emberheart's shadow passed over a homestead and people shielded their eyes. After a fortnight, satisfied that relative order had been restored, Jon prepared to lead the patrol back to King's Landing. In a final gesture of thanks, the castellan of the outpost handed Jon a small cask of Dornish wine. The young soldiers teased him, suggesting they share it on the way, but Jon merely half-smiled and stowed it for later. What he truly looked forward to was returning Emberheart to her siblings, seeing if the mission might serve as a precedent for using dragons in a way that did not lead to widespread carnage. Their journey north was largely uneventful, with no further ambushes. Yet as they neared King's Landing, they encountered a different sort of chaos. A ragged line of refugees stretched along the main road, laden with carts of belongings, livestock, and hungry children. Word quickly spread among them that a dragon was approaching, and they scattered to the roadside, many bowing or cowering. Jon dismounted at a safe distance, approaching on foot, instructing Emberheart to remain perched on a rocky outcropping. He spoke to an older woman who seemed to be shepherding a group of younger folk. "What's happened?" he asked, voice pitched low with concern. The woman's eyes were red-rimmed from weeping. "Raiders came from the east. Not bandits, but a company of sellswords, called themselves the Golden Company Reborn or some nonsense. They burned our fields in the Crownlands, said they were taking what was owed to them after the Queen's War." She spat on the ground. "They care not who they hurt. The local lord's men tried to fight them off, but we had to flee. Some say the sellswords are heading this way, collecting spoils along the King's Road." Jon shared a tense glance with the knights and Unsullied. They had heard rumors that remnants of the Golden Company, those who had once marched with Cersei Lannister, had gone rogue, fracturing into smaller mercenary outfits, many harboring grudges for unpaid debts or humiliations. Some had likely regrouped, seeking to carve out their own dominion in the post-war chaos. A scowl crossed Jon's face. "We'll alert the city," he said, though in truth, King's Landing had enough difficulties of its own. "Stay on this side of the river if you can. Find shelter in the villages loyal to the crown. We'll do what we can to drive them off." Leaving the refugees behind, Jon hurried the patrol onward. By the time they reached the outskirts of King's Landing, dusk had fallen, and the city lights shimmered in the distance, reflecting off the Blackwater Bay. Emberheart let out a shrill cry as they soared over the battered walls, announcing their return. Street lanterns flickered below like a constellation of stars. The watchers at the gate parted, allowing the knights and Unsullied to pass. Word spread quickly that Jon Snow had come back, bringing news of roving Sellswords in the Crownlands. By the time Jon dismounted in the courtyard, Grey Worm and Tyrion were there to greet him, along with a handful of guards. Tyrion gestured at Emberheart, who folded her copper wings behind her. "I take it you encountered some success. She seems bigger." Jon nodded, fatigued from the journey. "She's eaten well. We cleared bandits from the route to Dorne, but new threats have cropped up closer to home. Some rabble calling themselves the Golden Company Reborn are ravaging the Crownlands. We passed refugees not a day's ride from here." Grey Worm's jaw tightened. "We will move Unsullied to intercept." Tyrion rubbed his temple. "We can't keep plugging holes with Unsullied squads and the dragons. The realm is too large, the threats too scattered. Soon, half the kingdom will be clamoring for dragon intervention in every skirmish." He paused, looking at Jon with a rare, frank sympathy. "But we also can't allow Sellswords to burn the countryside unchecked." Jon exhaled. "I'll speak with Bran. Maybe we can coordinate a more permanent solution, station garrisons, or a united force under the crown. The presence of one dragon can do a lot, but it can't be everywhere." He glanced at Emberheart, who had crawled off to nuzzle against Obsidian and Ghostwing, exchanging sniffs and hisses. Drogon, high above, let out a low rumble that echoed off the half-ruined towers. "At least she's back safe." The next day, the Dragon Council convened an urgent meeting. The hall where they gathered had been further repaired in Jon's absence, though it still bore blackened patches on the ceiling. Lords from various regions, or their representatives, attended. There was Lord Royce from the Vale, ever watchful. There was the new Lord Lannister from Casterly Rock, a distant cousin of Tyrion's, who had inherited the seat after the chaos of the last war. The Stormlands sent a minor noble in place of Gendry Baratheon, who was busy with affairs in his own lands. Representatives from the Reach and the Riverlands sat on either side of the long table, exchanging worried glances. And of course, Sansa Stark had sent an envoy from the north, a gray-haired steward who bore her seal. All looked to Jon, Tyrion, and Grey Worm for guidance on the Sellsword threat. Jon stood at the head of the table, arms crossed over his chest. "This is not a minor bandit raid. Reports suggest these mercenaries may number in the hundreds, possibly more if they've recruited other disaffected soldiers. We need to coordinate. If each region stands alone, they'll pick us off. They're well-armed, hardened by war, and desperate for coin." Lord Royce leaned forward, bristling. "We have the Knights of the Vale. Say the word, and we'll ride out and scatter these rogues. We don't need dragons to handle a band of Sellswords." The Riverlands envoy snorted. "That's all well if the Vale is willing to foot the cost alone. Are you prepared to defend every corner of the realm, or only your own roads? We in the Riverlands are still rebuilding from the war with the dead and the subsequent battles. If this Golden Company Reborn turns west, we won't stand a chance without outside help." Tyrion folded his hands, nodding calmly. "And that is why we must act together, not at cross purposes. The question remains. Do we deploy the dragons directly, or do we keep them in reserve? The Golden Company has faced dragons before, however briefly, when Daenerys attacked. They'll know how dangerous that is, but they might also know a few tactics to bring one down if we're careless." Grey Worm's voice was quiet but firm. "Underestimate them, we cannot." Silence hung over the table. Then the Lannister cousin spoke up, clearing his throat. "Perhaps the real question is whether we can negotiate. Offer them terms, gold, territory, something, so they lay down arms. They fight for coin, no? If we can pay them or threaten them with dragon fire, they might disperse." Lord Royce scoffed. "Pay them? After they pillage our lands? That sets a dangerous precedent, inviting every mercenary band in Essos to try the same trick, hoping we'll reward their insolence with gold. No, we must push them back, show strength." One of the archmasters from the Citadel, a thin man with deep-set eyes, frowned. "Or we risk a protracted conflict that bleeds the realm. The crown is not exactly flush with resources, is it?" Tyrion sighed. "We stand at a crossroads, indeed. We have just begun to recover from an era of constant war. Another drawn-out campaign could hamper that recovery." but letting Cell's words do as they please is unthinkable. I propose we try to contact them first, see if they'll accept a peaceable solution. If they refuse, we respond swiftly. Perhaps an overflight by Drogon or one of the younger dragons will convince them to back down. If not, we hold them at bay with combined forces from the Crown, the Vale, the Reach, and any other willing parties. Jon considered the plan. It may be wise, but I don't like the idea of tempting them with gold. Still, if we can spare the realm another wave of burning fields, it might be worth a chance. Let's see if they'll talk. He did not miss the flicker of relief and apprehension passing across the gathered faces. Behind their masks of formality, each lord likely had his own calculations about how the realm might splinter if another war erupted. Thus, a small envoy was assembled to attempt negotiations. A pair of knights known for their diplomatic skills, 2 scribes, and a standard-bearer carrying the sigil of House Stark side by side with the crown's banner. They would ride out along the Rosby Road, where rumors placed the Golden Company's main force, carrying a formal offer of parley. Jon wanted to accompany them with a dragon as a show of strength, but Tyrion advised caution. If you show up on a dragon, it might provoke them or confirm their worst suspicions. Let's see how they respond to mere words first. While the envoy departed, King's Landing waited with growing tension. Refugees continued to trickle in, and rumors circulated about roving Sellsword scouts. The council prepared as best it could. The Vale mobilized a small contingent of knights, the Crown reorganized remnants of the City Watch, and Grey Worm readied a detachment of Unsullied. In the meantime, Jon spent his hours with the dragons, ensuring they were well-fed and settled. Every day, he and Grey Worm measured the growth of Obsidian, Ghostwing, and Emberheart, marveling at how quickly their frames expanded. It was not long before Ghostwing's wingspan matched Emberheart's, though the pale dragon remained more slender, favoring swift maneuverability. Obsidian, largest of them all, was nearing 2/3 the size of Drogon, his black scales shimmering with red undertones. Late one afternoon, as Jon was checking on Ghostwing in the courtyard, he looked up to see a peculiar figure approaching. A woman clad in scarlet robes, her hair bound in a loose braid, eyes glinting with a fanatic gleam. Hariella, the Red Priestess from Volantis, who had lingered in King's Landing since Daenerys' funeral, stood with her hands folded. She bowed slightly. "Lord Snow, or should I say Aegon Targaryen?" Jon grimaced. "Jon is fine." He continued stroking Ghostwing's neck to keep the dragon calm. "What do you want?" She stepped closer, though she kept a respectful distance from Ghostwing's coiling tail. "I have heard whispers in the flames. The Sellsword threat is but one piece of a larger tapestry. There are other forces at work, eager to see the realm weakened." Jon tensed. "Are you here to warn me of something specific, or just mutter prophecies?" A half-smile curved her lips. "Both. The Lord of Light shows me fragments. I see shadows crossing the sea, guided by unquiet spirits. I see a spire of black stone rising from the ruins of Valyria, and I see dragons. Many dragons, not just these 3, but more, perhaps unborn or undiscovered. They circle the spire in a storm of ash." Jon frowned. "Another threat from across the sea, you mean? We have enough to worry about here." She nodded. "True, but prepare yourself. The realm stands at the brink of transformation. Dragons were always a sign of upheaval. You carry the blood of the dragon, even if you do not claim the crown." Jon rubbed Ghostwing's scales, feeling the dragon's heartbeat beneath. He had little patience for prophecies after all he had seen, but part of him recalled how prophecy had played into Daenerys' sense of destiny. He did not want to repeat the mistakes of living by half-visioned truths. "If something comes, we'll face it. That's all we can do." Hariella's eyes flicked to the young dragons. "They grow strong, as does their father. Strength invites challenges. Be wary." With that, she turned and departed, her scarlet robe flaring behind her in the wind. Jon watched her go, unsettled. He tried to push the priestess's words from his mind, but they lingered like a splinter. He recalled rumors that Drogon sometimes vanished for days at a time, flying over the sea. What if he truly had discovered something there, a hidden realm, a place where more dragon eggs might lie dormant? The thought was both wondrous and terrifying. Already, the realm teetered under the presence of these 4 dragons. What would happen if a whole flight of them soared across Westeros? Days passed without word from the envoy sent to negotiate with the rogue Sel's words. Tensions rose. Lord Royce pressed for immediate military action while others urged continued patience. Tyrion paced in the council chambers, rubbing his temples. No news is rarely good news, he muttered. Grey Worm, stoic as always, prepared for the worst. At last, a rider arrived, one of the knights who had accompanied the envoy. Dusty, exhausted, and wounded by a shallow sword cut, he bore a grim face as he reported to the council. They refused parley, the knight said, voice trembling with fatigue. They took our standard-bearer captive, killed the scribes who were unarmed. They told us there'd be no negotiation with those who serve the dragon whore's brood. A hush fell over the chamber as the knight described how the Sel's words threatened to destroy any who stood with Targaryens or their allies. They named themselves Avengers of the old regime, men who had lost everything when Daenerys burned King's Landing. They demanded recompense in blood and gold. Tyrion's face darkened. So they wage war in the name of those who died here by killing more innocents in the countryside. How splendidly hypocritical. Lord Royce stood abruptly, fists clenched. Enough dithering. We have to deal with them. Otherwise, the realm perceives us as weak dragons or not. Jon nodded grim. Send ravens to muster the Knights of the Vale, men from the Riverlands, and any loyal crown forces we can spare. I'll lead the dragons. All four if Drogon will come. We can't let these mercenaries pick us off. They'll keep striking if they see no serious deterrent. The final plan shaped up quickly. A combined force of about 5,000 men would march east along the Rosby Road with a secondary force swinging south to cut off any retreat. Jon would fly overhead with Obsidian and Ghostwing while Grey Worm marched with the Unsullied. Emberheart would remain in the city as a reserve, to discourage opportunists from attacking King's Landing in their absence. Tyrion, ever cautious, argued that at least one dragon should stay behind. We've learned that leaving a city defenseless invites trouble, he said. But 2 dragons in the field might suffice. The day before they departed, Drogon reappeared, soaring in from the north. The watchers on the walls pointed in awe as he glided overhead and landed atop a half-collapsed tower, letting out a thunderous roar that rattled loose stones. Jon hurried to meet him, heart pounding. The massive black dragon seemed even more formidable than before, his scales bearing faint scratches from some unknown conflict. Jon approached carefully, calling Drogon's name, uncertain if the beast would remain. Drogon lowered his colossal head, sniffing at Jon, exhaling hot breath that smelled of sulfur. There was a moment of connection, something intangible passing between them. Jon spoke quietly. We face a new threat. Will you stand with us? Drogon did not reply in words, of course, but after a long pause, he let out a deep rumble that Jon interpreted as assent. When Grey Worm approached, Drogon's eyes narrowed, but he allowed the Unsullied commander to stand nearby. It seemed that, at least for now, Drogon would lend his might to the cause. At dawn, the host set out, banners snapping in a brisk wind. On the ground, thousands of boots stomped the packed earth. Overhead, Drogon soared, with Obsidian and Ghostwing trailing behind like smaller but still fearsome shadows. Small folk along the route clutched their children, both fear and wonder mingling in their eyes. The combined force marched steadily, making camp each evening under the watchful presence of dragons perched on high ridges. Each night, the flicker of dragonfire, used sparingly to warm the beasts' roosts, could be seen for miles, a beacon or a warning, depending on one's perspective. By the 3rd day, scouts reported sightings of the Sel's word force. They had taken over a modest castle near a fork in the Rosby Road, fortifying it with stolen siege weapons. Smoke rose from the neighboring villages, which the mercenaries had apparently sacked for supplies. As the realm's host advanced, Jon flew ahead on Ghostwing to gather intelligence. The pale dragon glided with remarkable grace, allowing him to see the castle from high above. He counted perhaps 2,000 Sel's words, though more could be lurking inside. They had ballistae mounted on the walls, clearly looted from the city or taken from old stockpiles. Ghostwing's keen eyes spotted the gleam of scorpion bolts, designed to pierce dragon hide if aimed well. Returning to camp, Jon relayed what he saw to Grey Worm and the commanding knights. They're prepared. We can't just swoop in breathing fire. They'll shoot at us with scorpions. A grizzled knight from the Vale stroked his beard. We can besiege them, Starve them out. But Grey Worm shook his head. They have small folk hostages, likely. We cannot wait them out without risking innocence. Jon felt the weight of it all. We'll surround the castle, give them one chance to surrender. If they refuse, we make a coordinated assault, dragons attacking from multiple angles to distract the scorpions while ground forces storm the gates. As the sun dipped low, the army encircled the castle, forming siege lines at a safe distance. The Sellswords did not attempt to sally, but watchers on the battlements could be seen moving about, presumably readying defenses. Jon and his council drafted a final offer of surrender: lay down arms, release hostages, and face trial under the crown's justice. At dawn, a horn blast signaled that the parley would commence. Jon rode forward with a contingent of knights under a flag of truce. Above them, Drogon circled like a black vulture, and Obsidian perched on a nearby outcrop, wings partially spread. The Sellswords responded by sending forth a small group of their own, wearing patchwork armor. Their leader was a lean, hawk-nosed man with a cruel glint in his eye, introduced as Ser Daren Sand, a Dornish bastard who once fought for the Golden Company in Essos. Ser Daren gazed at Jon Snow with open disdain. So the Kinslayer rides with dragons now. How fitting. Are you here to burn this castle as your queen burned King's Landing? Jon forced calm into his tone. I'm here to prevent further bloodshed. Release your hostages and stand down. The realm has no wish for more dead. Daren sneered. The realm? We are the realm's orphans, the ones left behind, the ones who lost everything to the Dragon Queen's madness. We simply collect what is owed. Jon tightened his jaw. If you want compensation, come petition the council. Pillaging and murder only sow more hatred. Daren stepped closer, ignoring the uneasy shifting of the knights behind Jon. Petition? We have no trust in your courts or your councils. We trust only in steel. And if you think your dragons will scare us, remember we faced them once before and lived. His gaze flicked upward, where Drogon soared. We have scorpions. We'll take a dragon down if we must. Jon's temper flared, but he kept his voice steady. Then you'll die, all of you. The scorpions might wound one dragon, but we have 3 more. Are you so eager for a grave? Devron's smirk did not falter. We'll take as many of you with us as we can. That's the difference between us, we have nothing left to lose. He tossed a rolled parchment at Jon's feet. That's our reply. Jon stooped, picked it up, and unfurled it. It was blank except for a crude drawing of a dragon's head crossed out by a spear. Fury twisted in Jon's gut. So be it. We offered you peace. They parted without further words. Back at camp, Jon reported the failure of parley. Grey Worm's expression hardened and the knights from the Vale bristled for a fight. The plan for an assault took shape. At sunrise, Drogon and Obsidian would strafe the battlements from opposite sides, forcing the scorpions to split their focus. Ghostwing would remain at mid-altitude, ready to dive if any scorpion turned its aim on the bigger dragons. Meanwhile, the ground forces, led by the Unsullied, would storm the gates or breach the walls with battering rams. It was a dangerous plan. Scorpions were deadly if they landed a direct hit, and the Sellswords were likely well-trained in using them. Still, speed and coordination might overwhelm them before they could cause too much harm. When dawn broke, mist clung to the fields. The realm's host arrayed itself, a forest of spears and banners. Trumpets sounded. Drogon took to the sky, a mighty roar heralding his launch. Obsidian followed, his black scales catching the early sunlight in dark iridescence. Ghostwing soared in high circles, letting out shrill cries. The castle walls bristled with scorpions, pivoting to track the dragons as they approached. Jon, mounted on a horse near Grey Worm, could feel the tension thrumming through the ranks. At his signal, the ground forces surged forward. Battering rams carried by teams of men rumbled across the muddy ground. Arrows whistled overhead, some flaming, aimed at the castle's ramparts. Above, Drogon unleashed a torrent of fire onto one scorpion emplacement. Wood and steel melted under the onslaught. Yet 3 more scorpions fired at once. 2 bolts missed their mark, zinging into the sky. The third grazed Drogon's flank, sending him into a furious dive. Jon's heart lurched, fear for the great beast pounding in his chest. But Drogon steadied himself, battered but not grounded. Obsidian, on the opposite side, swooped low, bathing a section of battlements in flame. Sellswords scrambled to reload scorpions, some catching fire, screaming as they fell from the walls. On the ground, the Unsullied reached the main gate. Shields raised, they pushed forward. Some defenders on the walls hurled stones and poured boiling oil, but the coordinated arrow fire from the Vale Knights kept them partially pinned. The battering ram thundered against the gate. With each impact, the wood splintered. Grey Worm himself led the charge, face set in grim determination. Up on the ramparts, a group of Sellswords wheeled another scorpion around, aiming for Obsidian, who was perched on a parapet spitting flames into the courtyard. Jon, seeing this from below, shouted, "Archers, that scorpion!" A volley of arrows found their mark, cutting down some of the crew. Yet one man managed to fire the bolt, which soared upward. Obsidian noticed too late. The bolt tore through the thin membrane of his wing, eliciting a deafening shriek of agony. Black flames erupted from the dragon's maw, scorching the rampart where the bolt came from. The Sellswords there disappeared in an inferno. Obsidian staggered, half flapping, half falling from the parapet. He managed to catch himself before hitting the ground, claws scraping the courtyard stones. Jon's heart hammered. He willed the young dragon to stay aloft if possible. Being trapped on the ground amid scorpion fire could be fatal. Summoning a burst of courage, Obsidian leaped upward again, battered wing beating furiously to remain airborne. Meanwhile, Drogon and Ghostwing targeted the remaining scorpions. Ghostwing darted in swiftly, loosing small blasts of flame, then veering away. The Sellswords' strategy collapsed as they scrambled to shift their aim from one dragon to another. Drogon seized the moment, sweeping down in a tidal wave of fire that consumed the central courtyard. In the chaos, the gate finally gave way under the battering ram. Unsullied poured in, clashing with the mercenaries inside. Steel rang against steel, and screams filled the smoky air. Jon dismounted his horse and joined the fray, cutting down a Sellsword who charged at him with reckless abandon. The smell of burning timber and charred flesh overwhelmed his senses. He looked up to see scorpions destroyed or in flames, their crews scattered. The Sellswords still fought doggedly, but the organized strike by dragons and ground forces was too much. Some tried to flee, only to be met by a ring of knights outside the walls. In less than an hour, the castle was overrun. The Golden Company Reborn was shattered, their leaders dead or captured. As the dust settled, the dragons circled overhead, ensuring no pockets of resistance remained. Smoke billowed from the ramparts, and the courtyard was littered with the dead and dying. Jon's ears rang with the aftershock of roaring flames and battle cries. He made his way to the inner keep, where hostages had reportedly been held. Unsullied had already kicked down the doors, freeing half-starved villagers who stumbled out, eyes wide with relief and terror. In the aftermath, the realm's army gathered in the courtyard. Grey Worm checked the wounded, while knights from the Vale took stock of the fallen. Tyrion, who had arrived as part of a supporting detachment, surveyed the carnage with a tight-lipped expression. He approached Jon, nodding at the lumps of twisted metal that had once been scorpions. "We've won." But the cost, he trailed off, eyes lingering on the black stains across the stones. Jon exhaled. "We had no choice. They refused surrender. But I'll not celebrate this. Too many have died." He looked up at Obsidian, who was perched on a broken tower, wing bleeding from the scorpion bolt wound. Drogon flew overhead, letting out a triumphant roar that shook the sky. Ghostwing clung to a far battlement, scanning for any stragglers. Jon's chest tightened with conflicting feelings, relief, sorrow, and a hollow sense that violence begets violence. That old cycle continued. In the days that followed, the survivors were tended to, the Sellsword prisoners interrogated and tried. Some claimed they had been forced to fight, threatened with death by their commanders. Others bragged of the murders they had committed, spitting in the face of justice. Sentences ranged from execution to exile, with a handful spared to serve in penal labor forces rebuilding roads. The realm's victory was clear, yet it was as bitter as it was necessary. Obsidian's wing was carefully tended. Maesters who had studied at the Citadel worked on cleaning the wound, applying salves to discourage infection. Dragons were resilient, but scorpion wounds could be fatal if they tore too deeply or festered. Jon spent long hours near the beast, stroking his neck and speaking to him softly, hoping the dragon would sense comfort. Obsidian occasionally hissed in pain, but allowed the maesters to do their work, perhaps recognizing their intent. At last, the combined forces marched back toward King's Landing, carrying the bodies of their fallen for burial. Along the way, they encountered grateful small folk emerging from hiding, offering meager gifts of bread and salted fish. The presence of dragons overhead, though terrifying, now symbolized salvation from marauders. Yet Jon knew that this balance could tip at any moment. The Sellswords had fallen, but other threats would arise. They returned to King's Landing in a hushed procession. Emberheart and Grey Worm's guards stood at the gates, greeting them. Crowds gathered behind barricades, staring at the returning army, the dragons overhead. A murmur spread through the streets. The dragons had won, The realm was safe for now. Some cheered. Others simply looked relieved that the city itself had not become another battleground. Jon dismounted near the Red Keep, where Tyrion awaited with a grim smile. "One war resolved, 1,000 threads remain," he murmured. Jon had no answer. Over the next weeks, the Dragon Council reconvened to sort through the repercussions. If nothing else, the expedition had proven that the realm could muster a coordinated response under the new system. But it had also shown how vulnerable they still were. The cost in lives and resource was high, and the dragons had not escaped unscathed. Obsidian's wing might never be quite the same, though the maesters were optimistic that with time and rest, he would regain most of his flight capability. Drogon had taken a glancing wound as well, though it seemed to bother him little. Jon often found the great beast perched atop the old tower at night, gazing at the horizon as though searching for something lost in the dark. Amid the swirl of administrative tasks and the sadness of funerals, Jon tried to find solace in small moments. One evening, he climbed a partially rebuilt tower, seeking a vantage point to look out over the city. The sun was setting in a wash of purple and orange. Far below, smoke from cookfires rose between the rooftops. On a neighboring parapet, Obsidian was perched, carefully folding his healing wing. Ghostwing and Emberheart flew in slow circles overhead, as though patrolling the twilight sky. Drogon remained on his usual perch, a dark outline against the dying light. Jon stood there, the wind tousling his hair, memories surfacing unbidden. He saw Daenerys in his mind's eye, standing before the Iron Throne, radiant and terrible, her dream turned nightmare. He saw the devastation of King's Landing when her anger had consumed her. And he saw this new realm, battered and uncertain, but striving for some form of unity under the watchful presence of dragons. A voice inside him wondered if Daenerys would have approved, if she would have recognized her dream in this precarious new order. Or would she have raged that others were carrying on her legacy without her? The memory of her face made him close his eyes briefly. He had come so far, survived so much. He thought of the Red Priestess's warning about unseen forces, of the possibility that Drogon's travels had stirred something across the sea. For now, though, the city was calm, and the dragons soared peacefully above. Jon let the moment of quiet sink in, feeling the swirl of wind against his skin, hearing the distant calls of children in the streets. The realm was tired of war, yearning for respite. Perhaps they could have it, if only for a while. He heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Grey Worm approaching. The commander's face was etched with the same quiet determination as always. "The realm is secure for now," Grey Worm said, by way of greeting. "The bandits in the Stormlands have quieted, and the sellswords are scattered or captured." Jon nodded. "One step at a time." Grey Worm paused, glancing at the dragons. "You have done well with them. The city does not fear them as they once did." Jon let out a soft sigh. "Fear remains, just more tempered. The difference is that people also see them as protectors. We need to be careful it stays that way." They stood in silence for a moment, two men bound by shared loss and the memory of a queen they had once followed. Grey Worm cleared his throat. "I will remain until the Unsullied are no longer needed. But I also think of Noth and the promise I made to Missandei. One day, I must see it through." Jon reached out, rested a hand on Grey Worm's shoulder. "You've done much for Westeros. When the time comes, if you wish to sail, no one would fault you. You deserve peace." Grey Worm's eyes flicked downward, something like sadness in them. "Peace," he repeated, as if it were a foreign word. Then, nodding once, he turned and left, his footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Jon remained on the tower, gazing out until the sky turned black and the dragons' shapes were lost in the darkness. He thought of the uncertain horizon that lay ahead. Tensions with Dorne, the uncharted ambitions of House Lannister's new lord, rumors of strange stirrings from across the narrow sea. Even the North, loyal to Sansa's reign, was watching keenly to see if the dragons might eventually turn their gaze upward. Through it all, Drogon remained an enigma, the ancient force behind this new era. Jon sometimes felt as though they were all living in Drogon's realm, not Bran's or anyone else's. The beast was older than any mortal claim, older than the cycles of war and peace that men waged. And he had chosen, for reasons unknown, to stay in Westeros, forging a new destiny rather than vanishing into legend. Time passed in a slow but steady cadence. Reconstruction in King's Landing advanced. More buildings rose from the rubble, though many scars remained. Some of the city's population even began to take pride in the notion of living alongside dragons, an echo of the old Targaryen heyday. Merchants from Bravos and Pentos ventured to the harbor, curious about trading with a capital that housed real dragons. A sense of cautious optimism permeated the streets, though overshadowed by the knowledge that every gain came with risk. The Dragon Council persisted, meeting weekly to discuss everything from farmland disputes to the potential establishment of a permanent dragon keep, a specialized fortress to house and train the beasts. Jon oversaw these sessions alongside Tyrion, Grey Worm, and the rotating lords of the realm. The question of lineage sometimes arose. Certain lords whispered that Jon, being the only known Targaryen left, ought to wed and produce heirs who might carry on the draconic bond. Jon bristled at the notion, still haunted by the memory of Daenerys and unwilling to be the centerpiece of breeding lines like some prized stallion. He deflected these suggestions, focusing on the pressing matters of governance and peacekeeping. As for the young dragons, their growth continued apace. Obsidian's wing healed, leaving a ragged scar that served as a grim reminder of the Sellsword scorpions. Ghostwing became the most adept flyer, often vanishing into the clouds for hours before reappearing. Emberheart showed a playful streak, sometimes gliding low over the Blackwater Bay to snatch fish from the surface, to the delight and terror of passing fishermen. None of them rivaled Drogon in sheer size and power yet, but they were well on their way to becoming formidable in their own right. Jon and the dedicated Draga keepers carefully maintained feeding routines and training exercises, ensuring the beasts did not lapse into destructive impulses. Outside the city, the realm's lesser crises continued to surface. Raiders in the Iron Islands tested the new order, forcing the Crown to dispatch ships to guard the western coasts. Tensions flared in the Reach when a noble family claimed the right to a farmland contested by another house. Each time a conflict arose, the question hovered, should dragons be sent to enforce peace? Would that reduce violence or simply provoke resentment? The council debated each case, juggling the imperative to prevent chaos with the need to avoid tyranny by dragonfire. It was a delicate balance. Rumors trickled in from the east, reinforcing Hariella's cryptic warnings. Merchant ships reported sightings of strange vessels in the summer sea bearing unknown sigils. A few whispered of a shadow creeping across Essos, perhaps mercenary armies or something else. The name Volantis cropped up more frequently as if the ancient city were a nexus of gathering forces. Jon listened to these rumors with a guarded mind, uncertain if they pointed to a genuine threat or simply the usual swirl of gossip in a fractured post-war world. Tyrion, however, seemed more concerned, quietly urging the expansion of naval patrols. Late one night, as the city slept under a moonless sky, Jon was awakened by an urgent knock on his chamber door. A guard's voice called, "My lord, the Black Dragon has returned injured." Jon was on his feet instantly, hastening to the courtyard. He found Drogon lying on his side, chest heaving, a jagged wound along his left flank. A group of frantic Draga keepers hovered, unsure of how to treat the massive gash. Grey Worm stood nearby, brow furrowed. "He came in over the bay, roaring in pain," the commander said. "We do not know what struck him." Jon approached cautiously, fear constricting his throat. Drogon's eyes were half-lidded, his breathing labored. Blood as dark as night oozed from the wound. The edges looked burned, as if seared by some intense heat or strange substance. Could it be the venom of some creature? Or an exotic weapon? The city's best maesters were summoned. While waiting, Jon tried to soothe Drogon with a gentle voice, though panic roiled in his gut. Drogon's head twitched, a low rumble of pain vibrating through his throat. Maester Ryman, a stout man with a steady disposition, arrived and examined the wound by torchlight. He pursed his lips. "This is no ordinary cut. The edges are charred, but not by the dragon's own fire. I need my instruments." The maester's assistants hurried to fetch salves, cloths, and tools. However, the challenge was immense. Drogon was far larger than any of the young dragons, and even treating Obsidian's scorpion bolt wound had been difficult. Drogon flinched, nearly crushing one of the keepers, who dove aside. Jon ordered the courtyard cleared of anyone who wasn't necessary for healing. As the maester worked, Grey Worm asked quietly what could have done this. Jon's mind raced. Another dragon? Some monstrous beast across the sea? A new scorpion-like weapon? Or perhaps something else entirely shadow-binding or dark sorcery rumored to linger in the ruins of Valyria? I don't know, he admitted, voice tight with concern. But whatever it was, it hurt him badly. The night wore on intense vigil. Maester Ryman cleaned the wound, cutting away scorched scales to apply a thick poultice of herbs meant to stave off infection. Drogon groaned and thrashed, but Jon stood near his head, stroking the ridges of his brow. "Easy, boy," he murmured, ignoring how foolish it felt to call this ancient creature a boy. "Easy. We'll help you." At intervals, Drogon's tail twitched, knocking loose stones from the courtyard walls. The watchful presence of Obsidian, Ghostwing, and Emberheart overhead added to the tension. They sensed their sire's distress, shrieking in agitation, but for the most part, they kept their distance. At last, before dawn, Maester Ryman stepped back, exhausted. "We've done all we can. The wound is bound. If infection does not spread, he may yet heal. But we'll need to monitor him closely." Jon sagged with relief, though worry still gnawed at him. Drogon's breathing had steadied somewhat, though he remained lethargic. Where in the Seven Hells had he gone, and what had he battled? As daylight broke, word spread through the city that Drogon was injured. People reacted with alarm or speculation. Some believed another dragon had arrived, challenging him for territory. Others spoke of monstrous creatures in the Shivering Sea or the Shadowlands beyond Asgai. Tyrion tried to quell rumors, but the city seethed with them. Meanwhile, Hariella the Red Priestess appeared at the courtyard's edge, offering to pray for Drogon's recovery, claiming Lawloress flames could cure him. Jon was too weary to argue and let her attempt her rites from a distance, though he trusted the maesters far more than any miracle. Over the ensuing days, Drogon lay curled in the courtyard, seldom moving. The wound healed in slow increments, but not without complications. Feverish heat sometimes radiated from his body, and he whimpered in pain, a sound that made the very stones tremble. Jon insisted on sleeping nearby, as did a rotation of Dragonkeepers. The other dragons hovered around, distressed, though at times they ventured off to feed, returning to check on Drogon. It was as though they sensed the precariousness of the situation, the possibility that if their father died, the entire fragile web of this new realm might unravel. When Drogon finally gained enough strength to stand, it was a dawn streaked with pale pink light. Jon was awake, leaning against a broken column, half-dozing. He heard a scraping sound and looked up to see Drogon rising unsteadily to his feet. The dragon's eyes glowed faintly and the bandages around his flank fell away, revealing a swath of raw, scarred flesh. Jon got up, heart-pounding. Drogon tested his wings with a few tentative flaps, wincing as the motion strained his wound. Then he let out a subdued roar, less thunderous than before, but resolute. Jon could not help but let a small smile tug at his lips. Drogon was still alive, still fighting. Maester Ryman approached, urging caution. He should rest more or he risks tearing the wound anew. But Drogon ignored the man, hobbling across the courtyard with slow, deliberate steps. The other 3 dragons squealed in alarm, fluttering to make space for him. Drogon made his way to the battered tower that was his usual perch, reared his head, and clutched the stones with his claws as though determined to resume his post as the city's guardian. Pain must have shot through him, for he hissed and crouched low, but he did not retreat. Jon followed at a safe distance, torn between relief and dread, marveling again at the creature's sheer force of will. Over the next several weeks, Drogon convalesced in plain sight of the city. He rarely flew, content to rest on the tower or in the courtyard, occasionally shifting to find a more comfortable position. The maesters continued to apply salves to the wound, though they marveled at how quickly dragon flesh regenerated compared to other beasts. Hariella kept up her prayers, muttering about how the flames of Lawlor would guide Drogon's spirit. Jon did not interfere as long as she caused no harm. Each day, the city's inhabitants glimpsed the great dragon's progress, a reminder that even the mightiest could be brought low by unknown foes. Speculation ran rampant as to what had wounded him. A rumor circulated that pirates off the Stepstones had a new secret weapon stolen from Karth. Another tale suggested that Drogon had flown to Valyria itself, encountering ghastly creatures twisted by centuries of doom. Jon had no firm answers and Drogon could not speak. So the realm pressed on, unsettled by the realization that there might be powers beyond even their greatest dragon's strength. As Drogon healed, attention turned to what lay ahead. The Sellsword threat had been contained, but new tensions brewed in Dorne, where factions debated their loyalty to Bran's rule. The Iron Islands tested the waters of independence. And across the narrow sea, rumors of gathering armies multiplied. The Red Priestess's warnings lingered in the background, a half-forgotten omen waiting to manifest. Amid it all, King's Landing continued its slow transformation, an uneasy capital for a realm defined by dragons. One starlit night, after Drogon had begun to sleep more peacefully, Jon found himself restless. He wandered to a remote section of the keep's ruins where the ghosts of old corridors still beckoned. The crumbled walls and shattered columns reminded him of the city's storied past. Targaryen kings, Baratheon usurpers, Lannister dominion. Now it was something altogether different, a hybrid kingdom, neither fully under a single king nor free of the old cycles. He traced his fingers across a fallen chunk of stone that might once have been part of the Iron Throne's antechamber. In the distance, he heard the faint roaring of a dragon, perhaps Obsidian, calling to his siblings. He thought of his lineage, the unasked-for-truth of his parentage that had led to so much tragedy. He felt no pride in being a Targaryen, only a burden to ensure the dragons did not destroy the realm. And yet, in a corner of his heart, he also felt a stirring of wonder at having witnessed these legendary creatures reborn, at forging a fragile peace for a realm that had known too much bloodshed. Daenerys had dreamed of breaking the wheel, and in a strange way, perhaps they were slowly doing that. Not by one person seizing absolute power, but by forcing the realm's nobles to collaborate, to respect the dragons without surrendering all moral authority. It was an unsteady path, riddled with pitfalls, but it was something new. A flicker of light caught his eye. Turning, he saw a figure in the courtyard below, Tyrion, carrying a lantern heading toward Drogon's resting place. Curious, Jon quietly followed, keeping a discreet distance. Tyrion set the lantern down near a pile of rubble and stared at the wounded dragon. Drogon's massive head swiveled, regarding Tyrion with something akin to mild curiosity. Jon heard Tyrion speak, though softly. I used to think dragons were the scariest thing in the world. And they are frightening, to be sure. But now I see what you are, an equalizer, a force that can level the proudest fortress or topple the mightiest king. Maybe that's what Westeros needed, after all, something bigger than our petty politics. He sighed, glancing at the black sky. Just don't burn us all again, please. One inferno was enough. Jon felt a pang, recalling how Tyrion had once tried to counsel Daenerys, walking the tightrope between loyalty and fear. He decided not to intrude on Tyrion's moment of reflection, stepping back into the shadows. Drogon let out a low rumble that seemed almost like acknowledgement. Tyrion shook his head and retrieved his lantern, ambling away. When dawn came, the city stirred with renewed energy. Traders opened their stalls, farmers arrived with produce, and the sound of hammers rang out as construction advanced. High above, Emberheart glided, her copper scales catching the morning sun. Ghostwing and Obsidian remained perched near Drogon as though standing guard or learning from their father's resilience. Slowly but surely, life pressed forward. The memory of the last battle receded, overshadowed by the pressing concerns of forging a viable future. In subsequent weeks, Drogon's wound gradually closed, leaving a thick scar that cut across his flank. He tested his flight capability with cautious short glides from the tower to the courtyard. Each time, onlookers gathered, holding their breath at the sight of the once-invincible beast grappling with mortal injury. But each day brought minor improvements in his mobility. Jon and the maesters monitored him closely, mindful that any infection could flare up. Yet fortune, or the old Targaryen magic, seemed to favor him. By the end of that moon's turn, Drogon managed a brief flight over the bay, returning in a labored but successful landing. The city collectively exhaled relief. But the question of what had wounded Drogon remained unanswered, fueling talk of unknown terrors beyond Westeros. Tension simmered in the council. Some believed they should fortify the coasts. Others insisted on seeking alliances with cities in Essos. Tyrion and Bran discussed sending envoys to Volantis or Karth to investigate rumors of new powers rising there. Every solution felt partial, overshadowed by speculation. Through it all, the dragons continued to symbolize both hope and danger, a precarious fulcrum upon which the realm balanced. One clear morning, with Drogon feeling stronger, Jon decided to take a flight with Ghostwing, who was by now quite accustomed to carrying a rider. He mounted using a simplified harness, guiding the pale dragon into the sky with gentle tugs and verbal prompts. Ghostwing, ever agile, ascended swiftly, weaving among drifting clouds. From high above, the city appeared almost peaceful, a mosaic of repaired roofs, winding streets, bustling squares. Past the walls, farmland stretched toward forested hills, and the glint of the river snaked across the horizon. Further still, the distant sea sparkled. In that moment, Jon felt a rare sense of awe. He understood anew why Targaryens of old had believed themselves near godlike with dragons under their command. The perspective from on high could intoxicate a weaker mind. Ghostwing caught an updraft, gliding in a wide circle. Jon let the wind rush over him, memories swirling. Once he had been a bastard in Winterfell, uncertain of his place. Then Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, fighting against the dead. Then a man who had loved Daenerys only to kill her for the greater good. And now caretaker of dragons, a reluctant figure in a realm that teetered between tyranny and unity. The irony was not lost on him. Yet in the crisp morning air, riding a dragon that soared with graceful power, he felt a fleeting sense of freedom, something beyond duty and regret. A roar below drew his attention. Drogon, evidently growing impatient with convalescence, tried to take flight from the courtyard. Jon watched as the great black beast struggled into the air, wings beating powerfully, rising perhaps 100 feet before the strain on his wound became too great. He let out a pained growl, descending to land heavily on the Red Keep's toppled walls. A wave of sympathy and worry rippled through Jon. He guided Ghostwing into a spiral, descending to hover near Drogon. The older dragon was panting, but not in mortal agony. Determination flared in his dark eyes, as though he refused to remain earthbound. Days turned into weeks, and gradually Drogon regained more of his old strength. He began taking short flights around the city, eliciting cheers from the small folk whenever they caught a glimpse of him overhead. His scarred flank, though permanent, did not seem to hamper him as much now. Jon noticed that Drogon never flew east anymore, at least not as far as before. Perhaps caution kept him closer to King's Landing, or perhaps he simply needed time to fully heal before testing unknown skies again. Whatever the case, his presence once more solidified the notion that the realm had its living guardian, a black dragon who overshadowed its attempts at progress and peace. The realm's fortunes improved in small increments. Harvests in the Reach were bountiful, helping to feed the recovering crownlands. Dorne remained somewhat fractious, but open revolt subsided. The new Lord Lannister seemed more interested in commerce than conquest, negotiating trade deals with towns along the Gold Road. Tyrion, juggling the responsibilities of hand and mediator, occasionally looked exhausted, but at least no immediate crisis loomed. That state of tentative calm might have continued indefinitely had not a fresh rumor arrived by ship from Pentos, a rumor that a fleet was gathering in the east, carrying sellswords and possibly creatures of unknown origin. The details were vague, some spoke of wyverns or lesser draconic beasts, others of dark sorcerers who could conjure illusions to terrify armies. Whatever the truth, the rumor alone sufficed to raise alarms in the council. Jon received the news one afternoon while inspecting the dragon's feeding arrangements. A messenger, dusty and out of breath, relayed what merchants had reported in the harbor. A Pentoshi vessel that docked in King's Landing carried stories of a new warlord across the sea calling himself the Scourge of Valyria. Supposedly, he had gathered exiles, pirates, and shadowbinders, uniting them under a banner of vengeance against the Targaryen dragons. Jon could scarcely believe it, another fanatic seeking to challenge them. The messenger, eyes wide, explained that the warlord claimed to have harnessed monstrous beasts in the ruined lands near Valyria. The authenticity of such claims was dubious, but with Drogon's own mysterious wound, it could not be dismissed outright. Thus began a new chapter of worry and speculation. Bran's small council convened daily to assess the reports. Sansa's envoy from the north suggested reinforcing the coastal defenses just in case. Tyrion considered dispatching envoys to Pentos or Volantis to learn more. Grey Worm quietly sharpened the Unsullied's readiness for another potential war. The lords of Westeros were weary, but an external threat could unite them if it proved real. Or it could drive them further into panic, fracturing the fragile alliances. Meanwhile, the people of King's Landing whispered about an oncoming storm from the east, recalling how Daenerys had once arrived from Essos on a mission of conquest. Jon, standing amid the swirling rumors, felt an ache of uncertainty. The realm had just begun to heal from so many wounds. Another war could destroy everything they had worked for. And yet, if an army truly massed, bearing unknown creatures or dark magic, they could not stand idle. Once more, the dragons might be their shield if Drogon was fully recovered and the younger ones were up to the challenge. But how to prepare for an enemy they barely understood? As the weeks wore on, scattered dispatches painted a muddled picture of the so-called Scourge of Valyria. Some said he was a madman clad in red armor bearing a staff of dragobone. Others claimed he was just a sellsword captain inflating his reputation. Ships arriving from Lys, Myr, and Tyrosh brought inconsistent stories, many shaped by fear or rumor. No one had concrete evidence of any monstrous beasts, only second-hand tales. Tyrion struggled to separate fact from fiction. He confided in Jon that the worst possibility might be that these rumors were intentionally spread as a feint, a ploy to unnerve Westeros. But if it was real, they had no choice but to prepare. Bran, distant as ever, offered cryptic warnings that times of great upheaval were seldom straightforward. One evening, he murmured in the council chamber, "The old empire of Valyria died in flame and shadow, but echoes remain. Some echoes can still roar." The assembled lords and ladies exchanged nervous glances. They were dealing with forces older and darker than the petty politics of the Seven Kingdoms. In response, the council made the decision to outfit a small fleet and send it eastward to investigate. A handful of reliable sea captains from the Vale and the Stormlands volunteered. They would sail under a neutral banner, hoping to confirm whether a hostile armada was truly forming. Jon wanted to accompany them, but Tyrion urged him to stay. "We need you here with the dragons. If a threat does come, the realm needs a Targaryen at its head, or at least a Targaryen in the sky." And so the ships departed, their sails vanishing into the horizon, leaving King's Landing on edge. In the interim, life continued, bizarrely normal on the surface. Farmers tilled fields, markets bustled, the reconstruction advanced. Drogon's wound fully closed, leaving a wide, jagged scar that cut across his flank like a brand of fate. He tested longer flights now, venturing over the city and occasionally beyond, but returning before nightfall. Obsidian, Ghostwing, and Emberheart followed him in formation at times, learning from his silent example. Their presence had become a constant in the sky above King's Landing, weaving a tapestry of wings and scale that both mesmerized and intimidated. Jon found a measure of comfort in the daily routines of dragon care. Each morning, he met the keepers to discuss feeding schedules and plan short training flights with the younger dragons. Each evening, he spent hours in the council or patrolling the city's perimeter, ensuring no fresh troubles threatened. Sleep came rarely and fitfully. On restless nights, he would climb the highest accessible tower, watching for Drogon's silhouette against the moonlit clouds, half hoping for some sign of peace or clarity that never quite arrived. At length, after many tense weeks, a single ship returned from the expedition east, battered by storms and manned by a skeleton crew. Its captain, pale and trembling, demanded immediate audience with the council. Tyrion, Jon, Grey Worm, and a handful of others gathered in a small chamber, bracing for the news. The captain's eyes shone with dread as he recounted what he had seen. "There are ships, many ships in the waters south of Valyria," he said. "Black sails bearing a sigil I didn't recognize, some twisted thing, like a dragon skull wreathed in flame. We tried to hail them, but they fired upon us with ballistae. We fled in the storm." Tyrion exchanged a grave look with Jon. "And what are these rumored beasts?" The captain swallowed. "I did not see dragons, but there were shapes in the sky during the storm. Lightning flashed, and I glimpsed something flying between the clouds. Could have been large birds or," he paused, voice catching. "They screeched like nothing I've heard before." Silence settled. Jon felt a chill creep through him. Another threat from the east, bearing a mocking reflection of dragons. Could that be connected to Drogon's wound? Perhaps he had crossed paths with their forces and barely escaped. Tyrion cleared his throat. "How many ships, Captain?" The man's voice shook. "Dozens, maybe 100. I can't be certain. Enough to be a real threat if they sail for Westeros." Grey Worm's jaw tensed. "We must be ready." Thus the news spread among the lords and the small folk alike. An unknown fleet gathered near Valyria, its intentions likely hostile. Fear rippled through the realm. Some panicked, recalling the devastation wrought by just one dragon in the past. Now, the possibility of facing monstrous creatures or even corrupted dragon-like beasts from Valyria seemed too horrific to fathom. Others, particularly the lords who had grown used to depending on the crown's dragons, insisted that Drogon and his brood would protect them. Jon recognized the dangerous comfort in that assumption. Dragons might not be enough if this threat proved as vast as rumored. Bran, in one of his dispassionate pronouncements, declared that the realm should prepare for war. A muster was called across the 6 kingdoms and in the north, which, while independent, remained an ally. Gendry Baratheon readied his forges in the Stormlands to produce new spears and swords. The Vale mobilized. The Riverlands and the Reach contributed food supplies. Dorne, still wary, pledged a token force. The Iron Islands, as always, vacillated, but they too recognized the danger of a foreign invasion, so some of their longships joined the coastal patrols. Tension built day by day as ravens flew in and out with scattered intelligence. In King's Landing, fortifications were hastily reinforced and scorpions re-emerged on the walls, ironic given that they had once been intended to keep Daenerys's dragons at bay. Now they might serve as a defense against unknown flying horrors. The Dragon Council met almost daily, discussing strategies. Would they send the dragons to intercept at sea? Risk a naval engagement? Or wait for the enemy to land where the realm's armies stood a better chance? None of the choices were appealing, each fraught with risks. Tyrion posited that if these rumored beasts were indeed smaller dragons, they might be less formidable than Drogon, but they could outnumber him. No one relished the thought of a sky filled with warring draconic creatures. Through it all, Jon wrestled with the uneasy sense that destiny was repeating itself in a twisted form. Once again, dragons from the east threatened Westeros. Yet this time, Daenerys was gone, replaced by an unnamed warlord claiming some dark inheritance from Valyria. Jon felt the burden of leadership more keenly than ever. The realm looked to him, not just for governance but as the one man who might match any threat of monstrous winged beasts. He couldn't pretend he was merely the reluctant caretaker anymore. The dragons were crucial, and he alone had the blood that truly bound them. Days turned into weeks with no immediate invasion, yet the tension refused to abate. Patrol ships returned with vague sightings of a fleet massing offshore, as if waiting for an opportune moment or forging alliances in Essos. On land, the newly formed armies drilled, catapults and ballistae were tested, and evacuees from coastal hamlets moved inland. The city itself swelled with refugees, taxing resources and heightening fears. Grey Worm and the Unsullied maintained order, though scuffles sometimes broke out at the gates. Meanwhile, Drogon, Obsidian, Ghostwing, and Emberheart flew frequent patrols over the Crownlands and the Bay, a visible reminder of Westeros's draconic might. One windy afternoon, as Jon stood on a battlement with Tyrion, the dwarf frowned at the horizon. If they're coming, why the delay? I don't like it. Jon scanned the choppy waters of Blackwater Bay. Maybe storms. Maybe they're gathering more allies. Or perhaps they're trying to sow fear, letting the rumors fester. He paused, remembering how Cersei had once tried psychological warfare. Whatever the reason, it's working. The realm is on edge. Tyrion nodded soberly. Yes, but perhaps that's not entirely bad. Fear can also unite us, keep us vigilant. Did you ever think we'd see the day when all the lords of Westeros cooperated against a foreign threat without trying to stab each other in the back? Jon let out a grim chuckle. We'll see how long that lasts if the threat fails to materialize. They might turn on each other, or on the dragons. Tyrion shrugged. Nothing in Westeros is permanent. For now, we have a chance. A fragile coalition, an uneasy calm. And 4 living dragons. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in orange and red, Jon watched Ghostwing and Emberheart returning from a scouting flight. Their silhouettes cut across the blazing sky in graceful arcs, each flap of their wings a testament to the improbable return of dragons. He felt a surge of resolve. Whatever came from the east, whatever horrors or illusions or monstrous beasts, they would face it together, men and dragons united. In his heart, he silently hoped that this time, the cycle of fire and blood might not drown them all. Yet deep within him, a voice whispered caution. The echoes of Valyria were stirring, drawn perhaps by Drogon's roars or by the spectral memory of Daenerys's conquest. Forces older than the 7 kingdoms might be waking. And if so, the new Dragon Empire in Westeros was about to face its greatest test, one that would determine whether dragons could truly guard this realm or plunge it once again into a cataclysm of flame. The night breeze carried the faint scent of ash and salt from the bay, a reminder of the precarious line they walked. For now, though, all Jon could do was stand sentinel, a man with Targaryen blood and a kingdom of uncertain loyalties, watching the horizon for the shape of an oncoming storm, prepared to meet it with the only power that might match it. The living fire of dragons reborn.